Yeah. No worries. No, no, it's not. It's available. Whoever will. Yeah.
I tried to tell him, take somebody who's in the cast, like,
I'll just sit and retire.
Yeah,
No,
Seth has some experience in this regard.
I've fallen in this room before, so.
Thank you so much. I wouldn't ask you to do it if I weren't productive for you.
Mark.
What's that?
Thank you. Mr. Marks is going to move out.
We're fine. Chilling. Yeah, thank you. Oh. Oh, okay, thank you. Blocking your wrestling ability. Oh, okay. Okay, got it. Okay. That's great. Hi there. That's fine. How are you?
We better get
Yes, go, please.
well, I just stand.
Yeah, oh, it's not.
We need a bigger order.
We're just waiting on the attorney.
On the way. Oh,
The
that's fine.
attorneys.
No, I got nowhere to be.
Yes.
Did you be back soon?
No, you read it.
Oh, I think you need somebody else wanted to sign up. No, I thought somebody
Oh,
else
somebody
might
else
want to
wants
sign
to.
up.
Hey. All right, we'll call this meeting to order. The Orange County Board of Education pledges to its citizens to conduct its business in a courteous and productive manner, showing respect for fellow board members, staff, and citizens. The board asks its citizens to conduct themselves in the same courteous towards both school personnel and each other. As per board policy, Robert's Rules of Orders will be used to conduct meetings. A moment of silence will be observed before each meeting. In addition to the moment of silence at each meeting held at a school site, the board will recite the Pledge of Allegiance. The board asks you to check your cell phones and other electronic devices to be certain they are either turned off or on vibrate to avoid interruptions of the meeting. This time, we'll take a moment of silence. All right. Dr. Bridges, do you have recognitions today?
No, we don't have any recommendations.
All right.
Slide to this side.
Okay, sorry. All right, do we have an adoption of the agenda?
Motion to adopt the agenda
Second.
That's with the revised personnel report.
with the revised personnel report.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Right, we'll start with public comments. I'll read a short. The Board of Education is elected representative body of the school district wishes to provide a forum for citizens to address the board with public comment. To provide an opportunity for input while conducting an orderly meeting, individuals or groups may be heard by the board in accordance with this policy. The board will provide an opportunity in open session at every regular meeting for the community members, students, and employees to address the board. A person wishing to address the board on a specific topic or an open session item on the regular meeting agenda must sign up prior to the board's regular meeting by signing his or her name, address, and the agenda topic on which he or she wishes to speak. The board will recognize the speaker. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes for regular meetings of the board. When the 3 minutes ends, the speaker must stop speaking immediately. Yielding time to another speaker will not be permitted. The board will not have a discussion with any speaker. No profanity or vulgar language will be permitted or personal abuse against any person. The board vests in its chair and other preceding officers authority to terminate the remarks of any individual when he or she does not adhere to the rules established above. Matters involving specific employees are protected under state law, and matters relating to specific students are protected under both state and federal law. Public comment should not address any specific confidential student or personnel matter. Complaints concerning any specific employee or student are not permissible during public comment. If you wish to address a matter that may require identification, either a student or a employee, please first direct your inquiry to the superintendent to assist you on the process to address your concerns. Additionally, if there is material you wish to present or give to the board, please hand the items to our Chief Communications Officer. He will deliver the items to the board. Citizens may not interrupt, disturb, or disrupt a Board of Education meeting and will be subject to provisions of General Statute 143 through 318.17. Nothing in this policy shall prevent the board from limiting public comment at any board meeting. All right.
First name is Gavin Phillips.
Gavin Phillips.
Hi, thank you. Board, thanks for the opportunity to share some information. So my name's Gavin Phillips. I'm the chairperson for the Eno River Academy Athletic Association and our boosters. Nationally, high school football has been on the decline at 7% over the last 3 years. Regular season football not only generates revenue for our schools, but it also helps build school and community spirit and gets many of our non-school families engaged in our communities, which could ultimately help us raise more money for bonds when they need passing. Orange County, unfortunately, is also seeing that same trend in football with several different age groups across the county. Cedar Ridge and East Chapel Hill High, for example, could not field varsity programs in the past couple of years. In talking to one of the recent coaches, Coach Hinton said that they only have 35 kids at Cedar Ridge, which is barely enough to field a varsity team and not enough to field a junior varsity team, meaning there's no players in the pipeline for this program to continue healthy and make sure our children are safe. He also shared that they've had no children from Gravelly Hills football program show up to play at the Cedar Ridge program. They're all coming from another middle school. There's several children that are enrolled currently today in our charter schools in and around the Orange County area. where football's not offered at those schools, nor in the conferences that they play. These kids have to go to private organizations outside the area, and they have to pay money that could be ultimately used for athletic fees in our area to help find this. Recently, Lenore County also voted to allow homeschool kids to play sports at their local schools. Last year, this board voted to allow players from Cedar Ridge to cross over and play at Orange High when they didn't have enough and safety was of concern. And those men were able to then play for that program. What I'd like to propose is that this board bring forth something where they allow children within the charter schools, and their families are already paying taxes in this area, to be eligible to participate and try out for those programs where their schools don't offer it. And I think everybody's open to funding that through whether it's allocating resources or actually coming up with some extra funds that might be today funneled into programs like a Durham Firebirds or other school leagues that might be out in Burlington. So my request is that just, thanks for hearing me on this, and hopefully at a time in the future that we can consider this for an adoption. Thanks.
All right, thank you for your comments. Robin Ellison?
Okay, you already said my name, but I'll say it again. My name is Robin Davis Ellison. I have 12 kids in the Orange County school system. I have 4 black kids, 3 biracial kids, and 5 white kids. The people that I know who attended school in Orange County, particularly folks of color, say the same thing. Things will never change. Black folks will always get the short end of the stick. I'm frustrated by that comment. But how can I argue against it? Each person can tell me a story about being negatively judged by their skin color while attending school in this county. Heck, that's probably any county, but let's focus on this county. Being suspended at a different rate from white kids, looked over for honor classes, being called the N-word with no real consequences is the reality. It was my reality, and I grew up in the Atlanta public school system. The really sad reality is that I can now relate at least 2 of those stories to each of my kids of color. It's been 50, 30, 10, and 5 years later, it continues to happen. I know, times are changing, but discrimination has a way of making time go super, super slow. As I look around the boardroom, I feel a little hopeless. 1, because of the statistics of racial disparities in our school system. 2, this board just took away a seat from a person that could have made a real difference for those of us who have a long history of discrimination. A person that it took me a minute to trust, but I did get there. However, I pose this question to the current board chair. How will you lead this board and change the minds of people of color? Know this, I am my kids' first line of protection from physical and emotional pain. The school year begins in less than 2 weeks. Let's get this school year started. For all kids equally, not just the ones who look like most of you and 5 of mine, but for all the kids of color.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Brian Crawford?
Thank you, Boyd, for allowing me to speak. Many of you know that I'm a parent, and I have had a daughter in the school system. I had the choice to pull my daughter out because of the way she was treated. These are the same things that some of the fellow speakers have said, that the school has treated kids of color poorly. I had choices. I could take my daughter out and move her somewhere else. I just looked at the data report that you're going to introduce tonight, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. Many of you have sat around, I'm talking about the 3 new board members, and campaigned that this year would be different. that kids of color would get a fair shake, that it would change. It's not changing. What in the world elementary school kids are doing to get suspended at this rate, I cannot believe it. I've been to many schools, many of you know that I operate a school. We don't suspend our kids of color. We don't have to. We care about them. That's your job, to make sure you care about these kids. This number can't keep going up. Now, when people start coming out and start talking about racism or all this other stuff, then you respond. But you knew this problem last year when you got on the board. Instead of fighting each other, you're supposed to be fighting for the kids. And you haven't done it. So when the community gets riled up again about these numbers, don't be surprised, because you're not doing your job. Do your job, ladies and gentlemen, or leave. Give it up. Don't be here. Don't waste time. Black kids, brown kids should not be suspended at the rate that you suspended them now. It just shouldn't happen. You talked about restorative justice. What is that? Walk around this state. Peaceful schools, there are so many models that you can implement to help these kids of color. Don't kick them out. All the statistics say kicking kids out of school does nothing. It's a waste of time. And yet that's the choice your principals are making. That's the choice that you're making as a board by not acting. Please, we can get riled up again and come out and call you ineffective, but that's, you know this. You know what job you need to do. You campaigned on it, some of you promised. Please, that number needs to go down. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Ben Colstead?
Thank you, let me speak. I'd like to talk about the transportation, the lack of transportation in Master's Garden, our after-school program. We've got two kids, two boys, that for 4 years now have been transported from Cameron Park Elementary to Master's Garden. And we were recently notified that it's not gonna happen anymore. We've called and gotten some information on it, so on. It's gonna greatly affect our family. Our boys are very comfortable there. They love the after-school program that's there. They've got friends there. The teachers love our boys there. And with such late notice, it's putting a bind on us to find adequate after-school care. And what we're finding is, in terms of financially, it's gonna affect us greatly as well, because if the options are not there. We've gotten on some lists to try to get in, but it's a big, big impact on us. And I know there's a lot of other families here that are in the same situation that we're in. And just not sure why, after 4 years, it's not acceptable anymore. And the answers that I've been given are, that it should have been because they're out of the zone and everything else, but we're just wondering why all of a sudden that it's changed. We would hope you would reconsider that, because I know it's close, and it greatly affects us, and we felt it was strong enough to come here and let you know that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. All right, board reports and comments, Ms. Stevens?
Sure, thank you. Well, I want to say that maybe you all know this and maybe you don't. A former employee, Dr. Aaron Woody, who worked for us, he is now the superintendent in Asheville City Schools. That's really good. It's good when, I saw that on Twitter. I attended a conference this summer, and crowdfunding was a topic that was addressed, and it was suggested that our boards try to learn about it. And I suggest that we add it as a policy item for discussion, because we all know what crowdfunding is, and some people are doing it, some people are not. So it's just, the School Boards Association recommended perhaps that we would, so it would be equitable. At the same meeting, the UNC School of Government reported that a couple of key concepts. And one thing that I didn't know and I wanted to share, that records created on a personal device or on your personal account are still public record if the content involves public business. I thought that was a bit of interest. And thanks to the staff, Dr. Bridges and principals for doing the, second graduation during summer school. I felt like I was in a episode of, Groundhog Day. Cause you all did the exact, and it was just a couple of students, but that said that they mattered and it was important. And you didn't do an abbreviated version of graduation, it was everything. And I appreciated it, and I'm certain that the families and the students, the ones that overslept, appreciated it as well. Thanks, that's all that I will share. I have 2 more pages, but I won't do it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mr. Brown? Sarah?
Well, I enjoyed the reception for Dr. Keeling today, our new Chief Equity Officer. Bridges, I imagine you helped set that up. I want to thank whoever helped set it up.
Yeah.
And Ms. Green for the great food, as always, and the community for coming out. That was a celebratory way to get started, so that's fun. At the end of June, I attended a school board conference that was put on by Leadership for Educational Equity, and it had a number of valuable sessions. There was one on hiring a superintendent, for example. But there were a couple that talked about data in particular, and there were a couple of websites that I thought have a lot of good information for you all, or the community as well, that I wanted to share with you all. One is the Edunomics Lab at Georgetown. They have, it's edunomicslab.org. And the other is the Data Quality Campaign. And both of them are really about how do we take data or money or whatever in schools and actually make it easy for regular people, parents, teachers, school boards, we are also regular people, to understand and then use and really make it useful. And so both of these organizations have a lot of resources and things, but one of the things they both talked about, which I had not heard of before, was in the ESSA requirements. Sometime between now and, I think they said February or March or something like that, school districts, states are gonna be required to put out data by school level per pupil spending data. So it's gonna have available on the DPI website. By school, you can see you'll be able to see each school, what is the per pupil spending. So this school in the district, it works out to $7,000 a student, and this school in the district, it works out to $10,000. It'll have how much of that money is at the district level versus in school. It'll wrap in, and the reason it might differ is because, you know, every school has a principal and an assistant principal and a nurse, and then there's different numbers of students. That's like one of many reasons. Anyway, it was very interesting to learn about that, and they talked a lot about how do you help your community make sense of that, and how do we make sense of that as a board too. It seems like really good, important information. So wanted to share that and those 2 websites. Those were sort of the best tidbits. The other thing that is on my mind, I imagine most of us saw the headlines about the ICE raids in Mississippi, and all those kids on the first day of school who went home and their parents weren't there. I know this has been the sort of how do we deal with fear in our families and communities has been a topic at a few points. We've put out FAQs and we've put out statements of support affirming that all students have a right to come to our schools and things like that. You know, at some point in the last time we talked about this, like 6 months ago, I asked what are our sort of procedures if a student, you know, if their parents don't come to pick them up, and how are we sort of preparing families for that? And, you know, I know that none of these school districts in Mississippi expected it to happen. You never know where it can happen. So that to me continues to be something I'm interested in discussing and understanding, is how are we preparing schools to know if something terrible like that happened, are we prepared to support kids? And does everybody know what to do? And I'd also like to make it easier for families to find that immigration FAQ on the website. It was the last, I saw it was published in February as a news item, but unless you like knew that and went back to find it, and that's the place where it says like, what if I'm afraid my child is being bullied because of their nationality? You know, it has the FAQs and things. So if we can make that either like short-term easier to find, but more on my mind was, You know, I think the website's undergoing some sort of big refresh or redo or something. I know that was something we talked about, and so when we're doing that, just generally sort of making it easier, user-centered, like making it more easy for families to find the things that they're looking for, which I'm sure is already a priority of that project, but this is like an example of the kind of thing. Last time I mentioned that Denver Public Schools, their website, I think has some really good FAQs and it's just very easy to find, so that's one example. And that's what I've got.
All right. Ms. McKenzie?
Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle." I read that quote at a policy meeting in January as we worked through the final iteration of our new equity policy. And I'm sharing it again tonight because our nation, our state, our community, and our school district are in a time of unrest as we face the reality of white nationalism and gun violence seeping into our grocery stores, offices, movie theaters, places of worship, and schools. Many of our students come to school in fear of mass shootings. I know as a parent, that's something terrifying to me. It's too close to home. While I may be one voice in a boardroom, I ask each of you to consider how common sense gun regulation and a ban on assault rifles would make the students in our county safer. I ask you to make your voices heard at the state and federal, to our state and federal representatives, and I beg you to lock up any guns you may own. As we begin our new school year, I also ask that each and every person in this district face the reality of racism and commit to denouncing all forms of racial intolerance, violence, biases, and structural disparities. Our students deserve and need to feel safe in our schools. They need to be in class in our schools, and they need more learning opportunities, not lockdowns.
Thank you. Dr. H?
It's hard to follow a very somber statement that Hillary just issued. I think the improvements we've made to security at all of our schools in the last few years, with significant funding from the county commissioners, has gone a long way. Even those of us who attended the reception for Dr. Keeling this afternoon at Cedar Ridge, you just can't pull a door open, you have to push a button so somebody in the office can. That's the state of affairs, and I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. 46 years ago, Mr. Ernest P. used to get to the school at 2:30 in the morning. I just saw Charlene smile out there because she remembers Mr. P. And at 8 o'clock when I arrived to teach, Mr. P would be taking a nap. This was 1973. And some teachers were complaining that Mr. P was taking a nap. And finally the principal told us at a meeting, faculty meeting the following week, Mr. P would get there at 2:30 in the morning to shovel coal in the boilers to heat up the school, so they would have a warm place for the teachers and the students. So the significance of that is this: I took a tour with Roger Ivy last week at Orange High. I wanted to see the new geothermal system. So we've gone from Mr. P shoveling coal at 2:30 in the morning, then they transitioned to fuel oil, then they transitioned to natural gas, and now we're into geothermal. And if you haven't had a chance to go up there and look at what they're doing, it's really worthwhile. There are 3 circulation pumps in the boiler room that replace these huge boilers that have been there for quite a few years. The place is torn up, but they're doing great work. The temporary mobile units are very impressive. But somehow or other, we need to remember Mr. P shoveling coal 47 years ago, and the work that people had to do back then. It's an amazing process. Take a look at it. The summer school graduation, I just wanted to reiterate what Brenda said a minute ago. Historically in this district, having seen 17 superintendents come and go and interims in between, I can only think about maybe 2 or 3 would have sat there patiently and allowed a second graduation to take place. And Randy, you were one of those 2 or 3. The rest of them would have said, that's it, and I'm leaving. And the interesting thing was, Kristen Madison has done an outstanding job with the summer school program. I'm working with a young man over there, and I've been in communication with Miss Madison during the summer. She got up there, and the people who were late arriving got the same message the superintendent was kind enough to read his same address, and everybody felt whole. And it takes a special person to lead that, and I want to thank Dr. Bridges and Ms. Madison for being those two special people that made that all take place, because that's not how it would usually go in some instances. And having attended the reception for Dr. Keeling this afternoon, we had a chance to meet her family, twin girls, a young man, and her mom. And I merely pointed out to Dr. Keeling that she needed to save some money, because I see 3 college tuition payments, I see 3 automobiles, 3 insurance payments, and a whole host of things, and we had a laugh. But I'm pleased she's here. I think it's a very exciting time for Orange County Schools, and hopefully it'll get some things attended to that need attention. So I'll stop right there.
Mr. McKnight?
No report.
All right, I also attended the summer graduation that Ms. Stevens talked about, and I just wanted to acknowledge Stan Farrington's wonderful address twice to the students. Thank you so much for your thoughtfulness in that. I also attended the Cedar Grove Ruralton Family Fun Day. I mention them because they do provide lots of scholarships to our senior kids. They do a lot in the community, and they're very interested in some of the changes that we are embarking on, and they've been a great community leader. United Voices of Eflin Cheeks, the Academic Culture Summer Enrichment Camp, went to that and enjoyed the program. Lots of pre-K kids, kindergarten kids, very diverse group. It was wonderful to see what they have learned, their excitement for learning, and the engagement of the community and their success. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing next year's. Attended the Rotary Club with Ms. Woodson. The Reading Ranger program is one of the programs they're reviewing to possibly implement here in Orange County. They are also looking at other programs where they could support us with volunteers and financing, where they would go in and work with teachers. Very much looking forward to hearing where they can help with that. I was at Dr. Keeling's reception too, and I wanted to thank Dr. Keeling for starting our equity training with our district leaders very recently. I'm also looking forward to her leadership on our equity journey, and I also encourage the community to ask questions and engage us in this journey, as it's not going to be an easy one, but a very necessary one. That's all I have. Dr. Bridges? You can do it from
You've
here.
already-
You can so do it
You've
from
broken
here.
it already.
You can so do it from here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I don't have a report, but would like to make a few comments on my first 6 weeks in the district. I've visited every school, had individual conversations with each principal, and you're fortunate to have them. I've had an individual meeting with all the cabinet members and talked about their departments and their visions for the future. I've met with each of you, with the exception of one, and that's my fault. I'm scheduling that one last meeting with board members and talk to you individually and learn a lot of things about you and your expectations for the school district. And I've learned that in all these conversations, everybody's working to do what they think are in the best interests of our kids. And that has been uniform. The rub often comes in with how that takes place. And sometimes there's different approaches to doing that. And I've learned also that it's better to work together in this process than to work against each other. I was invited to Hillsborough Elementary, who are in session now, the first day that their faculty and staff reported to work. Ms. Crowder emailed me, invited me to come over, and she didn't have any idea how special that was for me. Dr. Harrison and I were here when that building was vacant, and we renovated and started Hillsborough Elementary School as a year-round calendar and a school of choice. And it was so rewarding to see that 20-something years later, they're still doing real productive things for families and students. I look forward to working with you as you go through the process of searching for a new superintendent as we continue to try to move Orange County schools forward for all of our children. And for the second time, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay, consent agenda. Do we have any concerns or a motion?
Move the approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. For this next item, I will step out and let Mr. McKnight continue with the meeting. I request you'll just notify me when to re-enter, as I'm recusing myself due to potential conflicts.
Mr. Superintendent.
Dr.
Mr. Vice Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board, Policy 6321 outlines the criteria by which staff can assign a student to ride on a bus either to and or from a location other than their home, as long as that assignment does not impair the efficient operation of bus routes. Among the 7 conditions listed in this policy, number 4 states that the student's residence and requested bus stop must be within the zone eligible for transportation service. This summer, we received several requests for students to be transported after school to locations outside of their attendance zone. And those requests were denied due to this policy. This prompted us to check and see if we were providing the service elsewhere to make sure that we were being consistent in the application of this policy across the district. That's when it came to light that we were transporting students from Cameron Park to Masters Garden, which is outside of the attendance zone. And for that reason, once we had knowledge of this, we just couldn't continue to willfully violate the policy. And for that reason, we made the decision to inform Masters Garden and the parents of the students that ride that bus that we'll no longer be offering that service. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have about that.
Dr. Rich.
Well, how long do you think this has been going on?
So I know it's been several years. The gentleman who spoke earlier tonight said it's been 4 years.
I think it's been longer than that.
It may have been.
And it goes back maybe 10 years. I think it started up after I retired from the system in 2004. I've read what you wrote, and I've had I've read the emails that have come, and I just want to offer this. We say throughout all of our posted literature that we're the first choice for families. I think to suddenly drop 20 families into an abyss with the opening of school just around the corner is not displaying first choice for families philosophy. I would propose that we, and I've already shared this with Dr. Bridges, I called him the other day and I shared this, it's not gonna be something new that he's gonna be surprised with, that a more equitable policy would be that we give Masters Garden 45 to 60 days to figure out how to work this out and not throw the children and the parents into this chasm. Because being considerate and being respectful is part of being a first choice for families. And you've checked to make sure we're not doing this with any other facilities?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I do know that, I think originally, there may have been a drop-off at the church that owns Masters Garden, which is in the Cameron Park Distribution Transportation Network, if I'm not mistaken.
The church is, I don't know the history if there's been a drop there, but the
Yeah,
church is
I've
in the zone.
been there for funerals and seen kids getting dropped off. So I think it's incumbent upon Masters Garden to also come to the rescue here of their folks. But from my perspective, I'm just one member. I'm saying give them 45, 60 days to find something else, and then we need to get with our policy. But somebody in this school system, I have a suspicion, but I'm not gonna mention any names, took it upon himself to do this. And then it puts us in a quandary years later. You know, I get really tired of that after a while, because you can't treat people like that, and then people get upset, then we get put on the spot. And I've seen all these little kids here, they should be home right now, getting ready to go to bed, so they can be fresh and alert tomorrow. So I'm gonna stop there.
Ms. McKenzie.
In my notes, that was gonna be my same suggestion. I feel like we need to be in compliance with our policy, but I feel like giving them a last minute notice isn't really fair and doesn't, feel quite right. So if we could offer it for some period of time to give Master's Garden time to come up with a van or something like that, and families to come up with a carpool schedule or something like that, I think that it would be a better option if we can.
I
pull
think
it off.
they've got buses over there too, church
Oh.
buses.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry.
I was gonna say the same thing. Yeah, I think my kids are in after school, and so the idea of 3 weeks before school, just finding out that they couldn't go there, I wouldn't be able to come up with a
Not
solution
fair.
very quickly, so. But I I think it's important for us to be consistent, and, you know, if it's 2 destinations within the zone, and that's how we stop it from being every school to every, like, I understand we have to have some consistency, but the timeline is tough, so.
Staff stands ready to implement whatever the board directs, so.
Mr. Attorney?
Just want to talk about where we are procedurally. First of all, really staff didn't have any choice other than to do what they did because when they found out
That's
they
correct.
complied with policy and all that. This is listed as an information item to make it an action item if the board were so inclined. That would require 2/3 votes of 4 members to first turn it into an action item, and that would be step 1. And then step 2, if the board were interested in sort of continuing this past service for a temporary period of whatever you all decide that is, 45, 60 days is what I've heard, to allow some transition period, then the second motion would be to waive, suspend policy 6321, suspend policy 6321, and the suspension of policy requires 2/3 vote. And then the third motion would be to do what it is that you are maybe considering doing in terms of a temporary continuation of the transportation. And again, that's the pleasure of the board. I just wanted to explain where we were procedurally.
Can I just ask a question, Dr. Henry? I think it's important to understand, so if we were to do something like this, if we were to say, extend it by 60 days or something like that, can you just play out, what would be the impacts of that? Because I know you talked about, like, this bus runs other bus routes and things like that, so can you just play, just so we're fully aware before we
Yes,
make
so
that?
the way that the impact is right now, we run a 3-tier system, which means our elementary buses are used again for middle and then used again for high school routes. And so by having this stop, we wouldn't be able to use a 3-tier system for one of those buses that goes to Cameron Park. We would use that bus would be used only one more time for a high school route. And we did have some lateness in that bus arriving to the high school last year. So that would be the second and third order effects of doing this.
Mr. Roberts?
The 2 questions. One, you did mention that it was affecting our high school students for this. Do you have any idea how many students that is affecting and that they're getting home late because of that?
I don't recall how many students are on that high school bus. Do you recall?
Across 45 students, as of last year's year.
Okay, so we have 45 students that are potentially being affected. So that, to me, that's a significant issue. The second one is it is requiring us to provide us 1 extra bus in the afternoon.
An extra driver,
What's
yes.
roughly the cost of that?
I don't know off the top of my head. We would have to get back to you on that.
Well, I guess I'll give my input. I'm pretty much feeling the same way that everyone else is. I think it's a burden, you know, in getting all the emails as well, you know, and my concern as well is that there's such a short time span that we actually have. You know, I'd be in the option of giving 45 to 60 days and then working with Master's Garden as well as transportation to try to work something else out.
So do we need a motion on this?
First motion would be to switch it to an action item, and to carry it requires 2/3 vote with 6 of you present. That would be 4 votes.
I move that we move it to an action item.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
So the second, again, if the board were so inclined, would be a motion to waive policy or suspend policy 6321. That's a temporary suspension of policy 6321. I think we should just do it motion by motion, so that would be the second motion.
I move we temporarily suspend policy 6321.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried.
And so then the last would be whatever you wish to put in place, if it's a temporary basis. It would be easier if it's 45 days, say 45 days, if it's 60, so there's clarity about, temporary continuing the bus service.
I motion to provide bus service from Cameron Park to Masters Garden Preschool for 60 days, at which time it will be incumbent upon families or Masters Garden to provide transportation afterwards.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Are you voting for, I just wanna make sure if I'm abstaining, so that counts as an affirmative vote, you can put it as.
Motion carries.
Yes, got it. Thank you, sir.
All right.
We get, Mr. Chairman back in then?
Bring us back in.
Thank you, Tony.
Mhm.
All right, update on, reassignment. Is that Dr. Henry?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Tonight, we're gonna bring you an update on where we're at with the reassignment process, and in a moment, joining me at the podium will be Mr. Thomas Studley, representing ORED from NC State University that we partnered with throughout this process. First, I'd like to start just by giving an overview of why we're even having this discussion as a district. And as you know, and as we talked about in the abstract, a lot of work has been done over the past couple of years to bring us to this point. Work has been done through district policy, staff, as well as our partners have worked on doing research and land studies, land use studies. And this slide provides a concise explanation for where we're at. We currently have schools, especially at the elementary level, that are significantly over capacity and other schools that are under capacity. We do have residential growth that's occurring now and is on the horizon in Hillsborough and especially in the Mebane area. We as a district do have a desire for greater balance in socioeconomics in our schools. And it's no secret that we have aging facilities that require significant renovation comparable to the cost of building a brand new school. One of the specific examples of that is Hillsborough Elementary, which based on our standards for construction require a significant amount of renovations. And the numbers that you see on the slide are representative of numbers from the facility study that was done in 2014. So the cost would probably be about $25 million, we estimate today, to $29 million if you adjust for inflation. But those are the figures in the actual study from 2014. Well, if you're going to undertake the work of reassigning students in a district, then there are best practices that should be followed. And these are the best practices that we've attempted as a district to implement. Communicate. We formed a district website for student reassignment. Our superintendent in March sent out a letter to families explaining the process that we were involved in. We have formed a parent advisory council. We've contracted for outside help with ORED at NC State. We've conducted land use study interviews. We've completed a system-wide 10-year forecast. We've developed these out-of-capacity tables to understand where we're at today and where we project to be in future years. We've examined different scenarios, and with those scenarios, we've done a transportation analysis to go along with that, to understand the impact of transportation on reassigning students. So this evening, we're gonna recap steps 1 through 8, and then we're gonna propose next steps for step number 9 here. And obviously, there's a need to be flexible throughout the entire process as we discuss these different options. Just to bring you up to speed.
Could I
Yes, sir.
interrupt for 1 second with go back to the prior. So the Parent Advisory Council has been set up,
Yes, sir.
right? Why am I thinking somebody spoke at a public hearing, at a county commission public budget hearing? The person said they were from Hillsborough Elementary and they didn't know anything about a parent, am I right on that one?
That was a
That was
board
an
meeting.
Was it a
email.
board meeting?
Yeah.
So Hillsborough Elementary did have somebody?
They did.
They
They
did.
have
They
one.
did.
They did.
They
So
did.
they've got representation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, that's what I want to make sure.
So the Parent Advisory Council was formed and 4 community members were identified from each school in the district and invited to join the council. The first meeting was held on April 11th. In 2019, over 20 people attended. And at that time, they were given an overview of the redistricting process, of where we were up to that point by OCS staff. And they were shared, this slide was shared with them in terms of what the objectives would be for the advisory council. That the council would provide feedback on presented information that would include draft attendance boundaries, that they would represent the questions and concerns of the school community when providing their feedback, that they would communicate with their stakeholders and help lead the communications of scenarios to the greater community, and they could ask any and all questions free of judgment. Ultimately, it was shown that they're not the decision-making body, the Board of Education is, but their role would be to provide feedback to inform the board on next steps. This time I'm gonna step aside and bring up Mr. Dudley from ORAD ITRI, and he's gonna talk a little bit about their organization as well as get into some of the potential scenarios based upon the studies that we've conducted.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. As Dr. Henry has mentioned, I'm with ORAD, which is part of the larger Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State University, or ITRI for short. Speaking specifically about ORAD, we are the Operations Research and Education Laboratory. We seek to depoliticize the school planning process by keeping the focus on data and analysis, pairing together data as well as board policy and keeping those at the front of long-range facility planning, student assignment decisions, or redistricting. As you'll see here, we've had the privilege to work with many school districts across North Carolina over the history of the program. So what data, what information are we able to bring to this process? Well, it starts with getting to know what's going on in the community, first off. And that leads to a school-level forecast that goes forward 10 years. The sort of individuals that we spoke with as part of the land use study back when we started this project are planners and other domain experts who know about residential growth and other changes that are going to occur within Orange County over the next 10 years. So speaking with them, having those conversations and learning from their experience was a necessary first step for us. That, with all of that data in hand, and with those, that knowledge gained, we were able to create a 10-year forecast, which, working our way left to right here, we have the name of the school, the capacity of the school, and then in the color-coded areas, you see the current membership of the school and then forecasted membership working its way out 10 years. The coloring is based on the utilization of the school, so it's the membership of the school divided by the capacity of the school. The actual totals that you see for the different levels, so for example, the elementary total actually comes from SATFO's forecast. The actual distribution of students among the different schools, that comes from ORAD. The capacities are also from SATFO and do not account for K-3 class size changes.
Just make one note that the Cedar Ridge numbers do include the addition of the, beginning in 2020, 21, the addition of the new one.
Thank you. And actually with that, so that's the data side of when I discuss data and policy. So with that, I'll now switch over to review of board policy, Dr. Henry.
Yes,
So I do have a question before we go into that. It's probably more for you, Dr. Henry, is that, I probably sound like a broken record, but, so I do know the SAFO numbers show that we do not need any schools for 10 years. And I know that it doesn't account for pre-K, EC classes, CTE, or what we would call program level capacity at a school. They just take the raw numbers and say, here's what it is. So these numbers are based on our actuals, right? Our actual program capacity, not school capacities. Because there's a delta between the SAFO and what you're showing, is why I'm asking.
Yeah, what the SATFO does not take into account are the pre-K numbers and then the mandated class size ratios in K-3.
Right.
So what we're showing you are what current numbers are. We are in the background also running analysis of programmatic issues such as an EC classroom that would have a capacity of 4 students that may not be factored into a SATFO calculation, or a kindergarten class that has a ratio that's smaller than a 5th grade classroom, per se.
So one thing before I relinquish this, we really need, as a school district, to create our version of what our capacity is, because we get to these budget meetings and we have these discussions and we're told, hey, we're working on it, and it always ends the same. So I think we need, in our presentation as we do our budget meeting, that here are our capacities based on, our program capacities, whatever that is. I feel strongly about it because it's very misrepresentation from our needs versus actuals. But with that,
That's a good point.
Dr. Hawkins?
Well, just want to remind everybody that last year, I think it was last year, several months ago, the then chairperson, Ms. Stevens, asked me to represent this board in discussions that were going on between the 2 school systems and the county manager, the planning director, and his staff. And so there's a package there, and hopefully Dr. Bridges has access to that package. If he doesn't, I'll get you a copy of that. So at the end of the last meeting, what Mr. Atherton desires and what really exists in reality are 2 different things. The county commissioners and the planning process control the official capacities of the schools, not us. So the bottom line is this. We thought, the Orange County schools and the Chapel Hill Carborough schools, Ronnie Darcy was the representative from Chapel Hill Carborough. We were elated in April to hear that the staff was gonna recommend to the manager, and this committee is chaired by the county commission chairperson, Penny Rich, that the staff was gonna recommend that they were now going to take into consideration the fact that our pre-K programs are taking up space that are not accounted for in capacity numbers. The EC classrooms that may have only 4 children and are being assumed that it has capacity for 24. So all of these things that we would like people to understand is the reality of the situation. Actually, they were finally gonna recognize, and if you look at the minutes, we were all thrilled. I came back and I reported that, and Chapel Hill Carborough was excited. Then we had the meeting in May. They took a giant bucket of water and threw it on both of us. And they said no, because we were projected to need a new elementary school in 2022.
2, yeah.
Okay? They threw a bucket of water on us and told us, oh, now you don't need an elementary school till 12, 13 years out. This is what goes on. It's a political football. They refuse to recognize the fact that we've got EC classrooms that only have 4 kids in them. They consider them open classroom for anybody. Well, that's not true. They're not taking into consideration the pre-K programs. And I asked somebody, well, would you prefer us to go online and tell people that you're against pre-K? Well, no, you don't want to do that. So anyway, it's a political football that gets tossed back and forth. So what I reported back was this fall, there's gonna be a meeting at the fall meeting of the 2 school boards and the county commissioners. This whole issue is gonna be discussed, and that would be a wonderful opportunity to present a formal view of this board.
Yeah.
That's when we should do it and be forceful about it and get the message out to them. It's not fair.
Are they putting it on the agenda?
Well, it's up to the chair to make sure
Okay.
that we want it done from this end, yeah.
It will be. Mr. Roberts?
If you'll go back to the previous slide, it actually shows, and this is all tying in, that, and I know where the data's coming from, but just going across on Hillsborough Elementary, that's a fixed enrollment on that, yet it's showing that it's growing. If it can't grow, those students have to go in one of our other schools.
That's a good point.
So this I'm concerned about. And then the other one is, we know that there's a state mandate to adjust our K-3 class sizes, whether or not we get the appropriate funding for it. That needs to be in this too. So whatever we're presenting to the public and the county commissioners needs to be saying, based on our programs that we're required to have, whether it's pre-K, whether it's EC, or whatever, that this is how we're using
Bless you.
that number, that capacity. That if we have 502 seats at Cameron Park, we need to be able to say that we're utilizing 600 seats, and this is how we're doing it, that we need to be able to come in and show the reality of it. And that means that we show the mandated class sizes, that what we're actually doing. We get pre-K in there, and we definitely don't show a school that's got a fixed enrollment growing, because it can't absorb those unless we decide that we're gonna allow more students to go into it. So those students have to go in one of the other schools, and it's making them look like they're not full, and they have to be. So
It would be, it'd just be a different way of thinking about it. So instead of looking at it by capacity by seat, what you would look at it as capacity by number of classrooms, and then how those classrooms are delineated by grade span as well as programmatic.
But that's
So-
the way we're using them, and that's what we need to see.
So it's something that we could do. It would just look different, but a little bit of explanation. It shouldn't be too difficult to explain, instead of just looking at raw numbers.
Oh, but when I'm looking at those raw numbers, my first thing is I'm focusing in that it's presenting something that can't happen. Because we're not allowing Hillsborough Elementary to grow, so those students have to be somewhere. I won't know where they're gonna be.
Yeah, it depend on their neighborhood zone school or their attendance
Then
zone
they should
school.
be shown in, yeah.
All right, any other comments? All right, please continue.
So data is a part of it, and at capacity, however we look at it, whether it's by seats or by program, and the trends of where we are projecting folks to be based upon those interviews also is a part of it. But another guiding principle for looking at various scenarios for reassignment is our policy 4125, which we've done a lot of work on over the past couple of years. And so when we look at these guiding principles, those are gonna help us determine how students ought to be reassigned. And the four principles that we have outlined in policy are as follows. The first is student achievement. So we have a desire, we set that as a principle as a district, that we wanna balance student achievement in developing our attendance zones. Our goal would be that student populations at each school will provide an optimal opportunity for academic success. So that's minimizing high concentration of low-performing students at each school, promoting socioeconomic diversity at each school, and developing attendance lines and priorities at any magnet or choice schools in a way that's consistent with minimizing high concentrations of low-performing schools across the districts. This is language directly from our policy. I think it's so important to talk about our guiding principles that it's worth actually reading the information even though it's right in front of us. The second principle would be that of stability. So if we're going to reassign students throughout our district, to the extent that it's practicable, we want students to be reassigned with an opportunity to stay at their current school for one additional year if they're in their 5th or 8th grade year. If they're in their last year of that school, we want to try to find provisions to keep them at that same school. To the extent that it's practicable, any student that's currently in high school who's reassigned from an existing school to another school will be provided an opportunity to stay at that school to finish 12th grade. These are just things that the board would have to consider when we make final decisions. We would also look at sibling preferences for siblings that are at the same school and one is in the last year. And a change in domicile does not preserve the right to stay in your previous school. So if you do move into a new attendance zone, that wouldn't be a part of the stability process. So that's our second guiding principle. The third is proximity. And what we define what we mean by proximity is that we want to, as much as we possibly can, have students going to school close to their homes. In addition to that, we want to minimize splitting of neighborhoods when we're assigning students to schools. So that's what we mean by proximity. Of course, thinking about transportation, time that they're on the bus, that sort of thing. And the final being operational efficiency. Kind of some obvious things, but they're worth reading. We want to minimize our undercapacity schools. If we're going to reassign, we don't want to create a school that's under capacity. We want to minimize overcrowded schools. We don't want to duplicate services if at all possible to streamline those. We want to maximize efficiency for transportation, and to the extent that we possibly can, we don't want to have mobile classrooms. We want to minimize the use of those. So Mr. Dudley is gonna now talk to you about 3 potential scenarios that we could explore as a district and provide you with an opportunity to discuss and ask questions about those. And when he presents each scenario, he'll also put it up against a decision matrix that takes into account these guiding principles from policy, in addition to sharing with you data about what enrollment would look like.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. So this first scenario, scenario 1, we consider to be the redistribute student scenario. So at the elementary school level, we're talking about adjusting for pre-K classrooms because we know they're important. Once you do that, you're talking about having a system-wide current utilization percentage of roughly 96%. We know, according to the SAPFO forecast, that utilization will go up to 110% within the next 10 years. We know that balancing current students, and I'll stress the word current, balancing current students will not adequately balance utilization in the future due to uneven growth in the district. Reassignment would be required again 5 to 10 years from now with certainty, given this scenario number 1. Here you'll see the utilization chart that accompanies this scenario. It's possible computationally to balance these schools at 96%, but that does require splitting neighborhoods, particularly larger neighborhoods. Talking about how this sort of balances how things shake out with your guiding principles, balancing student achievement, this does not take that into consideration. Stability, that's really mostly wording related to grandfathering, so that's up to further board discussion. Proximity, no neighborhoods would be split. Operational efficiency, we could talk about in the short term only before potential reassignment is needed again. Scenario 2, to summarize, this would be a pre-K center at the central elementary site. The current K-5 enrollment at Central Elementary would then be reassigned to Pathways Elementary School. There was an additional analysis performed by Entry looking at the transportation impacts related to this, and you'll see there are some slight efficiency gains that could be had there from a bus routing standpoint related to dissolving those 2 attendance boundaries together. Here would be the potential utilization rates for these schools given scenario 2. Pathways would be at 120% utilization, which is roughly the same as what we would project for Cameron Park. Looking at the assessment matrix here, does not incorporate balancing student achievement. Grandfathering would not be possible because there would no longer be K-5 students or classrooms at Central Elementary at all. Proximity, no, it would, no matter where a student would be in the Central Elementary School zone, they would be sent to Pathways. And operational efficiency, no, it really only looks at balancing or increasing the utilization of Pathways. One important note about the first 2 scenarios here, they would both require the renovation of Hillsborough, full renovation of the Hillsborough Elementary School site. Scenario 3, relocating the year-round program from Hillsborough to Central, maintain a choice enrollment system for that school, but also develop a near the school downtown attendance zone. Central Elementary School students outside of that newly created attendance zone would be assigned to Pathways. Also, as part of this scenario, establish a district-wide pre-K center at part of the current Hillsborough Elementary School site. An additional analysis step that we looked at for this scenario as well is the transportation impact. The item here that jumps out to me is the last one, which is the minimal increase in 3rd quartile distance. That's a input into the funding mechanism for DPI and the reimbursement for transportation from them. So there are some efficiency gains that are talked through in the first 3 bullet points, but there could potentially also be a funding increase from the state due to that 4th bullet point. Again, we're talking about very potentially small numbers here, but it all adds up eventually. The utilization that you'd be looking at for these schools, again, Central Elementary would house the new year-round program, that's the second row, would have a utilization to begin with of around 130%. What that indicates though is the current students plus the students that are in that attendance zone, but then over time you would have the ability to whittle down that membership due to how, to what rates you accept, say, kindergarten students into that school from the sort of choice part of that elementary school. In summary, does this balance student achievement? Yes, absolutely. Stability, again, dependent on further board action about how grandfathering could be included for 5th and 8th graders. Proximity, yes, it splits the central attendance zone in between pathways and a year-round program at Central. And operational efficiency, it does help balance utilization among the impacted schools. To compare these scenarios side by side, I'm gonna, again, turn it over to Dr. Henry.
Can I ask a question about the numbers real quick?
Yes,
Yes.
go ahead.
For the scenario 3 numbers, when it says the central elementary or where the new year-round program would be in this scenario, are the pre-K classrooms accounted for in that capacity number? And how, we talked about it in one of the meetings we had, and I wasn't sure if those numbers had been updated to.
These numbers do not reflect the pre-K numbers. They would, the intent would be that pre-K classrooms eventually would move to the current Hillsborough site.
Right.
So for the first, however long it would take to get the Hillsborough site prepped, which we anticipate would be a year, that initial year of reassignment, those pre-K classes would remain in their traditional environments where they are right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so with the matrix and laying them side by side, scenario 1 is just simply taking students and just rearranging them throughout the district. Does not fit within the guiding principles of policy, nor does scenario number 2. Scenario number 3 does give us the greatest shot of hitting the guiding principles that are in our policy, as well as balancing the data, the numbers of students in schools. It does require a different way of thinking about the way we have students at our year-round school with an attendance zone and the choice option. So there would be other considerations that the board would want to consider, including track-out camps for kids that live in the attendance zone, what that would look like for students that are assigned to go there. In addition to that, it would also require some work to be done at Hillsborough Elementary. And the intent would be to bring the current Hillsborough Elementary site up to standards to house a pre-K center. Would be that the 2-story building, the 100 building, which is in need of the most repairs, the proposal would be to deconstruct that building and then to enclose the other buildings through walkways and utilize those other classroom spaces as pre-K classes. There would be some work that would have to be done there. Rough estimate cost, we did do some research on that. Depending on whether we would choose to deconstruct or demolish. Demolish would just be knocking it down and not thinking much about sustainability and just hauling away the debris, would be around $350,000. If we were to deconstruct and try to salvage as much as possible from the 100 building, we think that would be likely to be almost as much as double the cost, maybe even upwards to $1 million. So between $700,000 and $1 million, depending on what could be salvaged. To enclose the walkways and bring the classrooms up to code, there were projected costs associated with doing that in the 2014 study. Did talk to the authors of that study. In 2014, to enclose the walkways would have been around $1.4 million, but we believe with bringing classrooms up to code for pre-K and enclosing those walkways and making them fully ADA compliant, probably around $2.5 million. So all in, if we were looking at deconstruction of 100 building and bringing the rest of the building up to speed to be able to accommodate pre-K classes, around $3.5 million, which is significantly less than the full renovation of the $20 million plus that we had talked about. The other thing that would be important to do would be to memorialize the site because of the significant historical, because of the historical significance to our district and what that site has meant. We would want to do something to commemorate that site.
Well.
Oh, sorry, no.
Yeah.
she-
Oh,
yeah.
it doesn't. One thing I just want to say for the public, what is another advantage to having a pre-K center that's separate from our other buildings is that it doesn't, those classrooms aren't counted on SAPO, so it's a way of having a facility and then still being able to trigger the building of a new school in a more expeditious way than if we were to keep the pre-K in separate locations. Is that
Yes,
accurate?
yes, that's correct.
Just wanted to note that.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna throw this one out, but the pre-K right now is, what age group do we have on that? I think it's what, 4-year-old?
In a traditional pre-K, it's 4, but we do have some EC pre-K students that qualify for services who are younger than that.
And we could go down, we could offer pre-K to what age?
Based on our funding, we can do 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds at this point.
Okay. If we went with scenario 3 where we're remodeling, how much extra capacity would we have at Hillsborough Elementary if we wanted, and could get the funding to expand pre-K down to 3-year-olds?
I'm hesitant to commit to a number because it would be dependent on exactly what would have to be done to bring all those classrooms up to code, and there may be some that we just might not be able to.
Yes, sir, I understand.
So we would certainly increase our capacity to offer pre-K.
I would be real interested in whether or not we'll have capacity for that.
I feel very confident that we will increase our capacity, it's just by how much that is the question.
Dr. Arquez?
So you've looked carefully at the 200 and 300 building for pre-K? With all the considerations that the state demands with respect to egress, in and out, special playground considerations, bathroom considerations, and a whole host of other things?
Entrance and exit.
Yeah, because your numbers, your numbers sound a little low. That's my question.
These are rough estimates, but
Yeah.
In consultation with others, that's where
Because
we're at
I
today.
remember from past experiences in looking at what additional costs were incurred for putting in those special pre-K rooms at Pathways Elementary, which is our newest elementary school. It was a considerable bump. Then we went back and added additional rooms for pre-K at New Hope. And it meant going through walls to put in second doors, adding bathrooms where there were no bathrooms, adding special enclosed playgrounds where there are no special enclosed. It's a lot of work. It's just a lot to consider.
It is.
But I'm glad to hear that finally, after all these years, and I think at the time, and Dr. Bridges was here with Dr. Harrison, and Brenda was here, that the community was very concerned about the loss of this historical property, okay? And they still are, and yet that neighborhood is going through this dramatic real estate transformation up there right now. And I was talking to the son of a longtime advocate, Mariah McPherson, who passed away a bunch of years ago. And Miss McPherson was very, very courageous in standing up for her community. And she was afraid that it was gonna disappear down the road. And I think the challenge that the then Superintendent Harrison and the board at that time was to do something to keep that facility open. And somehow or other, it needs to be memorialized, much like they've done over in Chapel Hill with the Lincoln Center. The history alone in the gymnasium over there is worthy of a novel, okay? There's a lot of history in that school. And if anything, what's been proven at that school, you don't need a 21st century ultra-modern building for kids to learn it. Kids have done remarkably well over there. And I will say that when the building opened up back in 1996, it was much more culturally diverse than it is today. And that's the living truth. That's the bottom line. And it was a great experiment. It paid off for itself. It kept the building open and viable. But with time, changes have to take place. But memorializing what happened there is significant, whether it's in the desegregation movement, Ike and Tina Turner playing in the gymnasium. There is history there that you'd have to really look long and hard to find in North Carolina. It's a great place, and it still is today.
Ms. Stevens?
Right. So the question is, where will the kids go while the construction or deconstruction of HES is happening?
Yeah, so the first year, while that's occurring, the pre-K classes would remain in the traditional schools. And so we would have capacity issues that first year until the construction would be complete. So there's the potential that could be 1 year of additional mobile units until that construction is finished. Just to be totally upfront about how that would be managed, for the long-term gain of having a separate pre-K site and opening up capacity in schools.
And I have, if you indulge me, I have a second part to that. It's not really a part of that, but I want to say, I said to our board when we had a meeting, the VIII Center was the all-white high school, and it didn't get plowed down. And it's sitting right up there. The county is using it for offices and such. So as we talk about our school, I understand that it's costing a lot of money, but I know something can be done besides plowing it down. And thank you for saying.
Smiley?
Can I ask just a clarification about where we are in this process right now? So I know next I think we're gonna talk also about the community engagement from here, and I know this also says provide comment to the administration on the potential scenarios, and there's a lot to digest here in each of these options, and like I have deep interest in hearing what school communities want, and so could you just give us a sense of what are you looking to hear from the board tonight?
Sure.
In terms of this, and then I know there's gonna be a part of this that's like the community piece.
Yeah. The first would be any glaring feedback before we take this out to the community, any glaring feedback that we want to take into account in any of the scenarios before we go out. Secondly would be a little bit of direction around which of the scenarios, all three scenarios, only one or two of the scenarios that we want to take out to the community for feedback on. And then your feedback on the timeline, which I'll propose in a moment, for how we plan on getting feedback from the community, and any further thoughts on that. So if it's helpful, if there aren't any other questions on this slide, I'll go to that timeline, if that would be helpful.
I'm gonna go back to our capacity for pre-K, and it also kindergarten. We opened up kindergarten and pre-K to be more inclusive, not necessarily based on income this year. Is it, I think,
I'm not familiar with it.
So we do have a component where it is an opportunity for someone to tuition enter into the pre-K program. This would potentially, if there were more seats, we could offer that to more and more people, in both ways, both with our NC pre-K dollars or Title I dollars, as well as for tuition-based
yeah,
students.
and we, at one time, we did have a waiting list.
Yes.
And we still have a waiting list. So we recognize a need for the increased capacity for our, and that was pre-K. So and I'm focusing on that because it's an opportunity to serve families by increasing their capacity there.
Any other questions before we move?
These are the proposed next steps, that we would present information to the Parent Advisory Council first on August 27th, and allow them an opportunity to provide feedback to staff. And then in September, the week of the 16th to the 20th, that there would be 2 focused area meetings for communities that would be most impacted by the case studies. For example, current Central Elementary families are significantly impacted by this scenario, as well as pathways. So we would look to do a focused community meeting in Northern Orange County, and also in Center Hillsborough for families at Hillsborough Elementary that would also be impacted by this. So trying to put the focused area meetings for those that are most impacted by the scenarios. We would also, for those who couldn't attend, we would upload the presentation to our website, and we would embed a survey for those who couldn't attend the meeting to view the presentation and provide feedback on the survey. We would also ask for those who attend the meeting to give feedback on the survey, not just at the meeting, because we want to have a way to be able to capture everyone's feedback. And sometimes when you're just capturing feedback that's given to you verbally, you miss things. And then we could aggregate the data and bring back that feedback to you, as well as giving you raw data as well. September 23rd, we propose to come back and talk to you as staff about the feedback we received from those meetings. And and have further discussion. Then, in October, and we would host 2 open forums, and that would be an opportunity for public comment on the proposed scenario or scenarios. And again, we would continue to gather feedback at those meetings, present that back to you at our October 14th meeting. And the idea being, if we had to make adjustments along the way, we have these touch points at board meetings to make those. And then at the October 28th meeting, we would make a recommendation for what those new boundaries would look like. And we would ask that you would take action at the November 25th meeting. We currently don't have a meeting scheduled at the beginning of November. So the November 25th would be the meeting. And the reason for that is because if we are gonna enact new boundaries for next year, we have to make that decision prior to January 1st, according to our policy.
Can I ask a couple of questions about that?
Yes.
Just on that last point, before I forget, I think we only then have 1 meeting in December, so
That's right.
if any of this were to get pushed back for any reason, we would only have that meeting. It
Well,
doesn't leave
we
us a
could
lot of
always
extra.
call a special
Call a
meeting.
specially called meeting.
Yes, we could always do
that. The Parent Advisory Council, it sounded like at the first meeting, about half of them showed up, a little bit less. If there were around 20 people there and it was
Yes,
4
about
people
20,
from each
yeah.
school, right? And so, I guess I would just encourage, is that the first day of school, August 27th?
Second day of school.
Second day of school. Whatever we can do to create conditions so that people can show up, I think, like, in
That's a
order
good
for that to
point.
effectively represent, like, we need the people in the room, you know?
Let me think about that date a little bit better.
I mean, it's hard to get 40 people's calendars to line up for anything, I know, but whatever we can do to get RSVPs or send reminders or think about the
Remote.
date or all the things, like, let's do all the things so that people show up.
Remote access.
Remote access
That's a good idea.
potentially. And then the idea of the feedback on the survey from the people who come to the meetings, I think, I imagine that all of this information was transferred over to you. I know this process started long before you were in your role. But several of us had gone to a presentation that Rockingham County had done at the last School Boards Association conference last fall or something like that. And they did a survey live in the room. They had a whole bunch of laptops set up and that kind of thing, so that people could do it right in that moment. Because if you ask them to take it afterwards, they're not gonna I would forget.
That's our intent, is to follow
Okay.
their model. That's the model we're
Okay.
following. With all these
Okay.
steps, that is their model. I'm sorry, I should have been more clear.
Oh, okay, great. That
We would have
sounded
computers
very,
there
like a
that
very
night.
successful approach, so, okay, all right.
I think, Mr. Roberts, did you have a
I've got
question?
one. Steve.
You're good? Okay. Dr.
So
Hopkins?
I'm not trying to throw water on this. However, I was at that meeting with Ms. Darcy, and you can check with her, when we were told that the county has some big projects coming up. And I think that's just my personal opinion, that's what influenced the backtracking. Where in April, they were gonna take into consideration the reduced classroom numbers because of EC and pre-K, and then they reversed course. They're planning on building a $50 million jail, $45 million jail. They've got a whole host of other activities. And I heard the comments made, well, we've got projects too. So, as soon as you guys have a collaboration meeting set up, the 2 school boards and the county manager and the superintendent?
There is one set up. I
Well,
think
you may
it's
wanna
October.
bring this up, because they have an agenda for that too. And because where are we gonna get the money to deconstruct or whatever changes we're gonna make? You remember, some of them had a fit when we went out and bought the old Orange Charter property
Right.
in the Meadowlands. So if they had a fit on that, there's gonna be a bigger fit if you start knocking a building down, okay, or renovating or whatever you're gonna do. I'm just putting that out there, because this money is not just gonna fall from the sky, and you're gonna have to fight for it. So some people were already going after the Cedar Ridge money, that we're going to the groundbreaking this Thursday. Some folks tried to grab that money, because the deconstruction of Chapel Hill High is now running close to, what, 35 million, 40 million, and it's about 15 to 20 million over budget. I'm merely putting that out there. Before we get too far down the road on this thing, you need to go after it politically and see exactly how much support you're gonna get. I'm just throwing that out there.
Any other comments?
My recommendation would be, because scenarios 1 and 2 really don't fit within our decision matrix, that we seek feedback on scenario 3 and
Yep.
scenario 4.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
So I was, I guess kind of surprised to see scenario one, because I thought the point of working with ORAD was that we wouldn't just go off of current numbers, but we would be able to foresee the growth, you know, and be able to do something that, so, like, that doesn't, like, because you'd need to do reassignment again in 5 years. So why isn't there a version of scenario one that builds in more of that anticipated growth and does try to create a longer term?
We examined quite a few scenarios when we first started working with our board and they had our regular meetings, and you can start with these goals of sort of minimizing travel distance given building constraints, working with building scenarios around balancing student achievement, and looking at the district level, looking at individual school impact regions, things like that. And as we explored that route that you're describing, there wasn't anything really that jumped out to us as being a viable option. So that's why we haven't shown that.
So you've got these like fancy computers, but there was not a way to work it to anticipate the growth, build that in, and then also do the like solve for the district efficiency of the busing and the student achievement balancing. There was not.
Because of the capacity issues that you'll be running into, that was the major constraint.
Okay.
At the elementary level, yes.
We're still gonna run into them.
Yeah.
To create the space in schools where the population's gonna be in 5 years, you'd have to have them under capacity now, and others at over capacity, and over time they would balance out. So that's why we require reassignment again in another 5 years when those population patterns shift.
Okay.
The challenge we face is that our elementary schools are primarily centrally located within Hillsborough, and the growth is happening, is projected to be happening towards the Mebane area.
Okay.
And so, you know, that makes it difficult for proximity purposes.
Yes.
And I just wanna, since your equity policy, as we sort of talked about in policy committee, is sort of a super policy, it's the lens through which everything else is sort of looked at, so I would just suggest that there be an equity review of it. I'm sure that you all would do that, with the new equity officer, but.
Can I mention one thing on this timeline?
Sure.
The September parent meetings are scheduled during HES's intersession, and since they're such a big piece of this equation, maybe we should relook at a date where people will be in town.
No problem.
Thank you.
As long as the intent would be to be able to have that meeting and to be able to give you feedback on the 23rd, so we could certainly adjust the timeline.
Or at least get in touch with the folks and see if,
Sure.
you know, it works or something.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We'll adjust that. Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
My only comment is like, these would be big changes with like lots of impact and, you know, there are pieces of this that I really like. I like the idea of creating more pre-K seats. I like the idea of not spending $29 million to renovate a building if it would cost $29 million to build a new building. You know, there's some things like that, but I'm just really, really interested in hearing community feedback, so I think that's gonna be a really big piece of the process.
Yeah, just one other concern. Does your model take into consideration current rumors that may be floating around the county?
Glad it doesn't.
You're glad it doesn't. Well, there's a current rumor floating around right now that there's a 600-unit apartment complex going in that field in Eflin where the Texas Longhorn cattle are grazing right now, right across from the little hot dog stand, okay? I'm just putting that out there because the county upgraded, they put in massive sewer lines up there, there's water up there, and one young firefighter died working on that lift station down near Gravelly Hill Middle School, and that new sewer line comes right down through there. And the rumor is there's a 600-unit apartment complex, so if you haven't had recent discussions with Mr. Benedict, please have them.
Excellent.
Okay?
Will do, thank you.
Because if it's true, that could have a huge impact on Eflin Cheeks Elementary.
It's not the only ones that do it over capacity there, that you, just on the border, just believe me. It's gonna be a few schools.
Could I just echo Dr. Henry's recommendation on scenarios 1 and 2, since you've got a policy with your 4 pillars, and if the first two scenarios are not in compliance with the policy, I would agree with Dr. Henry that they shouldn't be brought forward, because they're not aligned with policy.
So I have a few questions. It sounds like you're asking for our guidance to move forward with scenario 3. And looking at the timeline, there doesn't appear to be a way to change scenario 3. My concern is we've talked a lot about HES, but we haven't talked about Central. I mean, I'm very concerned with moving those families that have built that wonderful school. So I'd like to know where in this, if we get community input that comes out with a better thing that we hadn't thought of, haven't discussed, that we would have that opportunity to change that. Because it feels like, you know, I don't wanna walk out of this room with everybody thinking, hey, we've made the decision, we're just gonna go and have these discussions, because I'm very uncomfortable with where we're at right now, but I get y'all need to move forward to have the discussions, but I am concerned with the Central families and what we're doing. The second comment I have is, part of our strategic planning was to look at Partnership Academy moving over to the newer building and modifying that. Is there any scenario that we would reclaim, reutilize that as part of whatever the interim is? Because we would have that facility available, and it's not a bad entrance and exit, it's off a side road, but has that been considered in any of this?
Has not,
Okay.
because it would be so dependent on timeline of getting that back building renovated. Has not been a part of the consideration up to this point. Can certainly make it a part.
What do you foresee being there?
I'm sorry?
What do you foresee being in the Meadowlands?
I didn't know if pre-K could be shifted there, or.
They can't go up and downstairs.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just saying, there's
Yeah,
constraints because of what it's made for right now, and I know some
Yeah.
elementary school kids were there, but you can't send
Right.
K2 up flights of stairs and things like that, so it's just.
Yeah, as we vacate buildings,
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanna make sure we're thinking through, because I agree with the assessment of the funding and where the money's gonna come from. So I'll just state, I'm very uncomfortable with option 3. I understand it, I get it, but I definitely wanna have some community conversations and figure out what other options we can come up with. Cause like I said, option 1 and 2 are just really bad, and then 3 seems like we're saying, hey, this is it. Anyway, I'll get off.
Well, I think the good part about it is whatever feedback comes from the parent advisory committee or just the community in general, they can plug it in to what your priorities are, and it'll spit out the data. I mean, you'll get a chance to see what it impacts the schools up and down the line. The unfortunate part is, some people will leave this meeting and tomorrow we've already made this decision.
That's what the headline will read.
And we have not, but the good part about it is getting that feedback and going through this process and system, you'll see everything that you want to place in there matched against your priorities. It'll give you what that looks like. So, that's the good part about it, that's the good part.
One of the other things I just wanted to say is, I think one of the main things that the board from our retreat, which was also a public session, that we were talking about, is that from the community, it hasn't been decided, but we also wanna hear from Central families and HES families how it could work, how a scenario like this could work for them. And to be clear that this is not Central Elementary having a year-round program, and this is not HES moving across the street to Central, but this is a relaunch of our year-round program in the district. And so we want genuine feedback about what that would mean for families and how it would affect them.
Okay, Dr. H has been saying for a while.
I think you need to slow down a little bit, and I'll tell you why. This is very reminiscent of what happened in the year 2007, when the board wrestled with this whole thing about Central Elementary and Hillsborough Elementary. And it ended up in turmoil. There was an election coming up, more turmoil, and Mr. McKnight and I were part of that election process back then. And this is a very aggressive timeline. We're talking about hopefully having a new superintendent coming in here in November, and you're gonna throw the new superintendent into the hot boiling water. I doubt seriously this is gonna be a smooth, tranquil process. It never is. And I really think, I would suggest we need to slow down. If you're going to do the kind of seeking out the parents of Central Elementary School and Hillsborough Elementary School, I've already had a couple of phone calls this weekend. It sounded like a decision had been made to shut Hillsborough Elementary down within the next few weeks, and we're gonna knock it down. We don't even have money to do this. We're not even on the county CIP plan for it. Now it's 14 years out. They bumped us way out and moved Chapel Hill Copper way in. You need to meet with your colleagues in the manager's office and the chair. You need to have input from the parents of Central Elementary, because they're the ones that are really getting impacted from all of this. And this is an extremely aggressive schedule. And so then we have, poor Dr. Bridges is sitting here saying to himself, holy cow, okay? New superintendent's coming in, and what are you gonna do to that poor person? I just think it's extremely aggressive. So the bottom line is, we started all of this with one superintendent, he's gone, we got an interim superintendent, we're hopefully gonna be able to select a new superintendent, hopefully, emphasis on hopefully. So we're trying to meet a time schedule, so we'll be ready to go with this next school year, right? Well, I'm saying it may not be ready for next school year. You can be as aggressive as you want, but if you can't do all the things you're talking about, you're gonna have, what, get 2 nights to meet with the parents at Central? We didn't even take into consideration the fact that they're on break at Hillsborough Elementary School during the 16th and the 20th. There's a whole lot going on. So I'd say take a deep breath and slow down a little bit for what it's worth.
I'll guarantee you that the new superintendent will appreciate that this decision's already been made.
Well,
He or she may.
Sarah?
right, I thought that was sort of part of what we could do for them to help them get off on, not the hardest kind of decision that, school districts make. I mean, the thing is, like, this has been underway for, I hear you, this feels very fast, and last year at this time, we said this isn't enough time and we need to kick it down. So, I we can't do that every year, it needs to be, I know that's not what you're suggesting. I feel like we should try to make it work, is my point of view. I know it's really ambitious, but, I'm just thinking, this happened last year where we were sort of at the same juncture and said, well, now it's too fast, so.
Matthew?
I'm gonna echo Sarah, and I'm gonna echo it in a different way. No matter what, it's out there now that scenario 3 is a possibility. We need to go ahead and allow staff to take scenario 3 to our parents, get the feedback, and then based on the parents' feedback, we may have to tweak it some. I mean, and we'll get, different ideas from both schools. There's no doubt in my mind on that. Central is gonna affect that you've got students that aren't currently on a year-round program. It's gonna affect their families, and then you got Hillsborough Elementary that will continue on a year-round program, but it will be in a different building. So in some ways, in my opinion, it's affecting Central more than it is that. But until we let them take it to the parents, we're not gonna be able to get the parents' feedback. So it's time to take it to the parents and let's get the parents' feedback. And then if we can meet this schedule, we meet it. If we need to tweak it, we tweak it.
Sarah?
And then the other thing I'll say about the piece about families who aren't on a year-round schedule now being zoned to a school that goes, which apparently is a thing that happens in some other districts.
Yes.
So there's some where you're zoned to a year-round school. For families who have not gone to a year-round school, in order to, I think it would be helpful to help them understand what would go along with that and how would that even work? Like, how would that even work? So if part of the idea here is, it would be a year-round zone and we would have, robust, like enrichment camp opportunities at every one of those breaks, and they would be on a sliding scale, or, you know, whatever it is. Like, if the idea there is to present that as a real opportunity, then I think we need to help people imagine what that would even be like, other than the fact that, like, you don't get a summer vacation and you have to figure out childcare like 4 times a year, which is sort of, you know, I don't know.
think that's
how
a
to-
really important
The
piece.
camp part is, we have to communicate that too.
Mhm.
I should have-
Yeah, I'll just say that I was part of this discussion of merging the 2 schools, and I attended the meetings and discussions, and a lot of what I heard at Central and at HES was, I have childcare that I don't have to pay for over the summer. I don't have a way to cover it because my sister or my aunt or my neighbor can't do it in the middle of October or February. So I agree with you on looking through these scenarios where we have appropriate care, or we have, you know, catch up or additional services that could be provided, during that. But I am very uncomfortable with this, other than, you know, us having the discussions, but leaving the door open to a different scenario other than this one. Because some of my other concerns is the historic nature of HES that Ms. Stevens brought up, and what are we actually going to physically do, and how do we capture that in a respectful manner, regardless of what it is. So I just worry that the schedule doesn't show, hey, we're gonna have the historical feedback on what we'll do. We'll have, you know, care discussed as part of that. You know, I worry that these timeframes are just places versus here's the details of what will happen in there. And one of these with the board having a discussion of a different scenario. I don't disagree moving forward is my only point. I just want us to have that opportunity to change the scenario if we get data and more information that makes better sense, is all I'm getting at.
Well, I'm in agreement with that, but, excuse me, I still go back, that I think that particularly for the central parents, that we need to hear the concerns from them, so that as we need to tweak it, that maybe they say, hey, we like it, but we don't have a place for our kids to stay for that intercession. Then we make sure that we present to them, here is what can happen to that. Here's the cost of it, if there is any cost, depending on their income. But until we've presented it to the parents, we're not getting that feedback. And I think it's time to go ahead and present it to the parents and get the feedback. And I'll hush at that.
Yeah, again, my only concern is us having the ability to change it if something else comes up. I don't disagree with anything you said. Any other comments from anybody?
So if that's the direction we wanna go, then I think that survey, I don't know what it says, but if the survey is just like, do you like this plan or not, you may not get enough information to find out what other scenarios we should consider.
Thank you. All right, research requests and action annuals report.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
So this evening, I bring to you the annual report on the number of research requests and actions taken per board policy 5230. Generally, Orange County Schools provides an opportunity for research by area universities, faculty members, students, and other dissertations or Orange County staff members that are independent contractors. Each request is reviewed by the chief academic officer, and then I consult with the principals as well as any other staff, and oftentimes with the attorney about the legitimacy of those particular research requests. In your attachments this evening, if you have noticed those, we had 8 research requests that were approved for the 18-19 school year, and 1 that was denied. The 1 research request that was denied was largely because of the participants. It was not a match process of the participants per the research process, and It was also gonna be incumbent upon our staff to do something that was outside of their hours and their compensation level to do that work. Do I have any questions about the research proposals for your information? Anything I can answer for you?
Sarah?
Only a comment. I'd be really interested in seeing these research
Absolutely.
papers, like, after they come out.
And we do ask multiple times, that's part of what we do with Jonathan's group, is to make sure that if there is data, not always is there data that's shared between groups, that we have access to that data and we can use that data as well. So we could actually, maybe at a student achievement meeting or something like that, we could absolutely do that.
And the screen for approval includes that the research results ultimately may benefit students of the school system.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's part of it, you'd wanna get the
Absolutely.
feedback.
Any other questions? Very good. Move
Uh,
on. So
Thank
Mary?
you. Yes, the Title I plan presentation.
All right, so I am also here this evening is to present to you the Title I plan for the 2019-2020 school year. This is an action item. Essentially, the Title I federal funding Part A provides federal financial assistance to state education agencies as well as local education agencies to support K-12 schools with at least 35% of their enrollment of students living at or below the federal poverty level. Title I funds support research or evidence-based programs and strategies to help ensure that all students meet challenging academic needs for this future. Essentially, we use our free and reduced lunch data to determine what our Title I bans are for our schools. Once we do that, we determine the categories in which those schools exist. Currently for the 2019-2020 school year, we use data that was gathered on February 28th, the last date of February. And once we determine those dates of the free and reduced lunch, then we determine what that percentage is for the following school year. That happens in every school district across the state. So currently, where we stand at this point in time, Central Elementary is at 73.2% free and reduced. Eflin Cheeks will be at 66.87. New Hope Elementary is at 64.19, and Grady Brown is at 55.17. So the Title I funding will support district wide initiatives, family involvement, as well as our pre-K programs and our homeless program. The only thing that's really significantly different this school year compared to what we did last school year is last year we used carryover dollars to support our pre-K classrooms. This year we have built that into the budget. So it is a part of the actual district set-asides of the pre-K program. We are also ensuring that we have additional dollars for the additional TA workdays that will be coming back at the beginning of the school year, so that we're gonna support that with our carryover dollars as well. School allocations are similar to last year based on whether or not the numbers of their free and reduced lunch students are in existence. Are there any questions about the Title I program?
So is there any board questions? Sarah?
Good one. I noticed in there was reference to migratory students as well
Yes.
as homeless students. And I was curious if we have migratory students in our district, and if so, how do we ensure that they're getting services as well?
Sure, so that's, we went through a great process actually, when we had a federal audit in March of this past year, talking specifically about that because there are some new procedures. Migratory students are identified in PowerSchool. It is not legal for us to share that they are in migrant status. So we communicate specifically with a contact person at DPI. So they generally they notify our ESL facilitator to let us know who those students are. There are additional dollars available if we had a significant number of them. Currently, we do not, and we have not for the last 3 years, had any migratory students. We have in years prior, and it could be that we may in this next school year, depending upon where they are living and moving and as time goes on. But we can receive dollars. We do know that we are notified through PowerSchool and ultimately through a point of contact from the Department of Instruction.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Other questions from anyone? The question I have is more of a projection question.
Sure.
So, given the redistricting question, how does this affect this funding?
It
I mean,
will.
obviously it won't affect it for this year, but how does it affect it? Have y'all looked at that scenario for?
So part of that question, I think that as you're looking through this scenario with Dr. Henry around what this actually looks like, one of the things we will wanna talk about as a district, and we will certainly employ your feedback into that process, is the threshold that we currently hold, which is about 48% as our initial number for entering into the Title I process. Do you wanna remain with it, keeping it at that point? Do you wanna push it up? Do you wanna push it down? And then there's questions that go along with that, right? We currently use the band process where students, we receive funding based on the bands of funding that are available. You can continue with that also, or you could change it. It's interesting as you research that across the state. Charlotte Meck uses a very high threshold for Title I dollars. They put all of their dollars in their highest need schools, if you're looking at a large district. Wake, many years ago, used to give a little bit to many schools. It's just again, a philosophical way of thinking about where you set your thresholds and what those extra dollars are intended to do and what you wanna do with that. But I would think that you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Once you settle on this, you're gonna wanna circle back to this conversation and think about the impact of that.
Well, you raise an interesting point. So who's next closest to the 48% entry point?
Currently, I think I may have that in this
Stand
document.
back.
Yeah, I think it is actually.
It is.
So we also actually choose to ensure that, we are putting the dollars in elementary schools as opposed to, we could also look at funding middle schools, which is a whole nother conversation.
No, I understand, but this is another opportunity for the equity officer that we have now to be participating in this process.
Mhm.
Because as far as I'm concerned, for many, many years, it was Central Elementary and Eflin Cheeks for the two Title I schools. And then with the band concept, we expanded it to 4. But if you're looking at a sense of where do you put your resources? Do you put your resources where your greatest needs are? Or do you spread them around to 4, or can you concentrate them better at 2?
That's a good question.
So my contention is you need to throw the resource at the 2 needier situations, is what you need to do. That's an opinion, that's all it is.
Yeah. The next one is, actually Pathways currently at 43.96%.
Yeah, so other places are gonna be affected if you use the same formula that you got
Yes.
right now.
Yes. Other questions? Very good. It is an
Alright.
action item.
We have a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, accountability model for alternative school.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I hope you're well, and thank you for having us here tonight. I have with me Mrs. Stan Farrington, the principal at Partnership Academy, and we are here to present for review and approval the 2019-2020 Alternative Accountability Model for Partnership Academy. And as a reminder, this is an action item.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Board members. At its December 2014 meeting, the State Board of Education approved a policy for an alternative schools accountability model. Local school boards, at an official board meeting, such as this one, must approve the request for schools to implement an alternative model. Originally, there were 4 ways to participate in the alternative schools accountability model. But at its August 2018 meeting, the State Board of Education approved updates to the policy, and it now allows 3 ways for schools to participate in the alternative schools accountability model. Option A is alternative schools participate in the same accountability model as any public high school. Option B, the state has established a structured format that allows alternative schools to show their accountability in an alternate way. And option C allows the individual alternative school to propose its own accountability model. We, as a staff at the alternative school, like option B. And this same accountability model, option B, was approved for Partnership Academy last year by the board. And the reason we like this model so much is that it combines student persistence, which is keeping students enrolled and reducing dropout rates. It combines that student persistence, and by the way, we were 91% at that this year. So I just thought I'd toot just a little bit. And then, but it combines the persistence, student persistence with student achievement, which includes student scores as well as the cohort graduation rate, and our cohort graduation rate has certainly increased. I think we're at 68% now, and from one time 57%, so that's an improvement. And then it also combines persistence, achievement, and student growth to give a real comprehensive picture of student performance. And this is an action model. Action.
All right, questions?
And you just know that your typical schools are, without the alternative model, you're looking at 80% based on competency rates and 20% on growth. So this gives you the opportunity to be rated more on growth, at 60% growth, which seems reasonable, obviously up to the board.
Yeah, motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, guys.
Right? Discipline data and code of conduct.
So we bring before you tonight a presentation of the 2018-2019 discipline data along with our response to that data. This agenda item is for information for this evening, but the addendum that accompanies this particular agenda item will be back in front of you on consent with your permission without additional feedback for the August 26th date. This presentation has 4 points. And four parts. Discipline data for the 2018-19 school year. Following that will be our response to that data, which includes involvement from the student support staff that Ms. DeGraffenreid will share with us later today, from Gravity Hill Middle School, the development of an administrative discipline committee, and the new code of conduct that Ms. Jamie Bell Williams will share with us. Forgive me, I wasn't sure where she moved to. And the code of conduct addendum as we prepare to launch the code of conduct for the January 2020 school year. The data in this presentation suggests that further action is needed, no doubt. In the 2018-2019 school year, we have worked with Engaging Schools to hold focus groups with students, parents, community members. We have conducted surveys, worked with community groups, and developed procedures for engaging student support staff for students who are at risk, as well as developed an administrative discipline team, all in an effort to change these outcomes for the 2019-2020 school year. We will begin this by looking at the discipline data. Here you go.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So the first part of the discipline data is focused on the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction Crime and Violence Report that we work with every year from the state. So every year, all incidents involving 16 criminal offenses are required to be reported to North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Among those are possession of controlled substance, possession of a weapon, possession of alcohol, homicide, assault resulting in serious bodily injury, assault involving the use of a weapon, rape, sexual offense, sexual assault, kidnapping, robbery with a dangerous weapon, taking indecent liberties with a minor, and there are 7 acts that are included in this report: assault on school personnel, bomb threats, burning of a school building, possession of alcoholic beverage, possession of controlled substance in violation of the law, and possession of a firearm or powerful explosive, and possession of a weapon. So possession of a controlled substance, possession of a weapon, and possession of an alcoholic beverage were the largest number of offenses for the 2017-18 school year across the state, as well as in Orange County schools. The number of reportable offenses committed by high school students decreased by 1.6% from 2016-17 to 2017-18. The crime rate also decreased by 2% to 11.88 acts per 1,000 students. In 2017-18, a total of 82,157 high school short-term suspensions were reported, a decrease of 1.4%. And these are just some state and district-wide data. When we look at the reportable offenses, in 2017-18, we look at them based on what the state sent us in incident comparison to surrounding districts. And if you will note, Orange County had 9.55 acts per 100 students in comparison to the districts that surround us. In 2017-18, district reportable incidents comparison, when we look at the reported acts for grades 9 through 13, Orange County had 31 reportable offenses compared to surrounding districts, with Chatham County being below us at 25 and Person County being below us at 18. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So the number on this slide, 31, and then 12.92 per 1,000 students, these are different incidents than on the one we just looked at?
No.
What's
So
the
this
previous
is
slide
per
of
one, this is, the state breaks it out per 1,000 students, but the 31 is the total number that Orange County School had.
Yes.
Period.
Yes, and then the previous slide, how is that different?
Per
Per
100
100
students.
But it can't be 9 per 100 and
Divided
12
by
per
30,
1,000, so I think I must be misunderstanding something.
That's the report that the state sent. I can go back and look at that, but that is the data. They send it, they put the report out every year, and this is the data I took directly from that report, but I can go back and check it.
But these are both of those slides are supposed to be about the 31 incidents.
Correct.
Okay. I think I'm just.
I'll go back.
No, it's
and
fine, it's
look at
totally
it.
fine, I'm just like, sorry, I'm trying.
So is total reportable acts and total acts different? The columns are different.
Correct.
Yeah.
So total reportable acts would be 31 out
Right.
of the ones that I read.
And total acts per 1,000 students.
If it's reportable or just,
Acts that the students, that were not necessarily reportable,
Yeah,
but
that's what
could have
I'm
been.
saying.
full,
Right.
okay.
That were criminal, but not necessarily reportable, because there are some that are not reportable. So I read to you the 16 that are reportable to North Carolina Department of Public Instruction.
So the one on the first page is just total acts, not reportable acts.
Correct.
It's confusing the way the state does it,
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
probably for
By
a good
design.
reason.
Yeah.
By design.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes.
So our next slide starts to look at our discipline data for the district. So when we look at, did I skip a slide? Let me go back one. Okay. The 2016-17, 2017-18, 2018-19 district out-of-school suspension incidents. So I wanna make sure that, I make sure that when I say in 2016-17, there were 87 incidents for Black or African American students, that's 87 incidents of out-of-school suspension, not 87 students.
Because maybe one student did.
Multiple
Multiple
incidents,
things,
correct.
right.
So that is, I wanted to make sure that I clarified that. So when we look at that data, there is an increase. And so I wanna say also that from 16-17 to 17-18 to 2018-19, we have increased the way that we report to make sure that principals, administrators, school staff are accurately reporting incidents that occur in their school buildings. So with the introduction of Power School, we had to start entering that data, and we had to be very careful about making sure that we were entering it correctly.
So you're saying in previous years, more out-of-school suspensions were happening than are reported here?
That could be, yes ma'am. Because we have, made a concerted effort to speak with administrations about reporting, making sure that they are reporting in Power School when these incidents occur in their building, when out-of-school suspensions occur.
So have you all looked at why is there a spike with the African-American kids from 2017-18 to 2018-19? That's a pretty big chunk. So what have you attributed that to?
So that's, as we get through this a little bit further, that's part of what we're gonna have to dig in further, right? So we've gotta pay attention to what's happening, where and when,
Yeah, and
right?
what- and
More
what-
in more detail.
And what level is this happening?
That's agreed. So at the elementary specifically, at the middle specifically, and at the high school specifically, and what are we gonna do about this data? You're exactly right, so that we can dive into it and disaggregate it so that we can determine, is it happening, for example, is it happening in the classroom? Does it happen in the hallway? Does it happen in the bus? What do we see that we can say, that we can put in place that would be intervention types of situations in order to impact the outcome of, so that we don't even get it to the point at which it gets to the office?
Well, it just seems to me, back in the old days, you had to fill this out as part of the register, that little book that tracked every kid, and you submitted a report at the end of the year. With the level of computerization now in Power School, it would seem to me that somebody could be tracking this daily. And if a spike showed up at one particular school or one grade level, you could highlight that immediately and jump on it and find out what's causing this. So you guys haven't done that deep dive yet.
So we have started that deep dive,
Okay, all right.
and we'll talk some more about it, but that is a part of what I use that term as progress monitoring, but you're exactly right. What you're talking about is on a regular basis, checking in to see are we making progress along the way? Absolutely.
Because I can fully understand why people are concerned. And I can fully understand why people are here tonight, because I'd be concerned too, if that kind of enormous bump took place.
So, I remember last year we had this discussion about, buses and suspensions, and my understanding from staff on that is this does not track suspensions from buses where we have decided they have broken a rule, but more of one of those higher offenses that they could do. But we were also told that the bus suspensions would now be in Power School, so we could see those as well. So is there a way you can tell us, because I remember last year when we were talking through the school improvement plans and we were asking, do you get more suspensions on buses, or, because of some avert action, at the school? And a lot of the principals were saying, oh, it's bus suspensions, right? And so I guess all I'm getting at is, if that data doesn't include the school bus suspensions as well, I definitely wanna see what those numbers are too, because I think we need to see the whole picture of any suspension, if it's off a bus or off of, out of education, because we don't want to miss that.
I'm gonna save most of my commentary till after we're done talking about all of this, but while we're on the topic of other discipline, I mean, we need to see in-school suspension too, because obviously it all goes hand in hand, and we're pulling kids out of classes, and black kids out of classes disproportionately, and other groups also, and I just think we are gonna need to see a lot more reporting in a lot of different ways, but I'll save some of that for after I'll let you guys have a chance to keep going.
The total percentage of district out-of-school suspensions, on this chart, what I'm trying to portray is the number of students that we're talking about for the 2018-19 school year that were out of school suspended. So on the other slide, it looked at the number of incidents, but on this slide, we're looking at the number of students. So in elementary school, when we looked at the out-of-school suspension incidents, there were 87 incidents. I'm sorry, that's not correct. There were, when we look at this, it will show you there were 53 incidents in 18-19 for African American students. But if you look here, that only involved 19 students. So what we found by digging into this data is that we have students who are having repeat behaviors. And that has changed the way that we have set up our next steps in support of students who are having some behavior issues and or getting suspended, as well as looking at how the relationship in that classroom is being supported for students and staff. So when we look at our middle schools, we're talking about 34 students, but we're talking about 82 incidents. When we look at just our African American students. And when we look at our high school, we're talking about 50 students, but we're talking about 87 incidents.
The one thing as we start drilling down in more detail, there's, in my mind, just going back to the one where it was talking about, they had it in one group, but it was alcohol, beverage, controlled substance, suspension, and firearms. In my mind, speaking for myself, there's a significant difference between an alcohol possession and a firearm on the school. So I would be interested to see how it's broke down by those different categories in there, to see if the punishment fits the crime. It's just, if firearm in my mind is just so much more severe than the other two. But are they getting the same amount of discipline? That's why I'm asking that.
Gotcha. And we can go back and pull that data. So this slide talks about the number of elementary students that have received out-of-school suspension across the district. When we look at the number of elementary students with OSS, we look at by race, there were 19 African American students, 9 Hispanic students, 4 multiracial students, and 16 white students. Of the 19 African American students, there were 53 incidents. So again, what we're seeing is we have students who are having repeat offenses and or duplication of suspensions. And so that's why we've changed the work that we're doing. Yes, ma'am.
What does an elementary school student do to get suspended from school?
There are a number of things that they could do to get suspended from school, harming themselves or others in the classroom and or staff, bringing a weapon to school, or behaviors like that, as well as possibly showing up with drugs and or alcohol. And these are some of our upper level elementary students.
I'm just kind of stunned by these numbers, and I would love to see an incident report broken down by race and school of who got suspended for what, because I just can't wrap my head around 49 students, and apparently that's even more incidents. And, you know, we bring out our student achievement data and we wonder why our black students don't do as well, but it's because they're not in class. And I just don't accept these numbers. I just don't accept them. And something has to give, and it has to give this year. And our kids need to be in class. And if teachers need more resources or principals need more resources, tell us what you need. But our kids need to be learning, not sitting at home.
Dr. H?
So I'm assuming that on the first offense, it automatically kicks in with what available school resources are there to help the student, to get the parents involved, whether it's psychological help, social workers, nurses, whatever. Because I look at Eflin Cheek's Global Elementary School. I find that interesting. What are they doing at Eflin Cheek's Global that you've got a minimum of one person involved there, that's one white kid? And then you start looking, and I'm not picking on anybody, I'm just looking at the numbers. And I'm assuming, once again, I'm going back to resources. We talked about these Title I allotments a few minutes ago. So do you need to, and yet Eflin Cheek's Global Elementary is a Title I school, but look at those numbers, very low, almost non-existent. So what's happening at Eflin Cheek's Global? Are we studying what's happening there? Are we studying what interventions are happening there? What's the prevailing philosophy? Because I know when that outstanding young lady was there a few years ago, Kylie Brown, she turned that place around, okay? She really turned it around. Unfortunately, she left, she's in Wake County now. But what's going on in Eflin Cheeks that perhaps other schools need to be looking at as some kind of modeling behavior? Hey, I know you guys are trying hard as you can with your restorative justice, capturing kids' hearts, and all of those interventions that really go to the heart and soul of helping parents and kids. But we need to start breaking this stuff down to see exactly what's going on. Do we need more social workers? Do we need more nurses? Do we need more school psychology people? What is it we need? That's you don't need to answer tonight. What I'm saying is I'm looking for some answers based on the numbers, because it is disconcerting.
It is. And based on these numbers, and I've flipped over to the middle school to look at those numbers as well, but based on those numbers, we've come up with just what you said, some things that we have seen working and a way to track so that we're able to look at it daily, weekly, monthly, because of the way that if a teacher is having some issues and or concerns, the way that it will be put into the system so that we're able to see it right then in the here and now and be able to address if we see a teacher that has a trend of so many suspensions or write-ups for a student, then we can address that teacher to find out what's going on. Maybe it's something with the teacher we need to address, or is it something with the student and the family that we need to address? And I think you'll see some of that as we move further into the.
Did you wanna?
I just wanted to add to this, and we will get there, and forgive me for kind of sitting to the side. I just wanted to really indicate what we learned and what we've learned this year as well as in the last couple of years. We know this has been an issue. This is not a new issue this year. It certainly has gotten worse this year for sure, right? We know for sure that we have to create systems in order to make this work. Our problem is that we had 13 separate systems, right? 13 schools that kind of handled it differently. And part of what we've had to do this past year is to get everybody on board. That's part of what you're gonna hear about today, this evening, and that's gonna be the work that we're gonna have to continue to do, is how do we get everybody on board so that we can create a consistent model, so that schools have a consistent model to look through. You'll hear that from Ms. Bell Williams in a few minutes. She's gonna talk a little bit about a common, just even as simple as a common discipline referral tool from every single school, so that we have a common way of looking at who was referred, why they were referred, where they were referred from, those kinds of things. So those common tools will help us be able to ensure that even though I'm gathering data from Hillsborough Elementary as opposed to Eflin Cheeks Elementary, am I getting the same data if I'm getting two different referral forms? Does that make sense? Okay. So that's just part of the process. Forgive me.
Ms. Stevens?
Well, I wanted to it sort of dovetails with what Hillary said. I'm really concerned that elementary school students are not in the classroom, because you certainly can't learn if you're not in the classroom. And we've heard a lot about restorative justice. I can't see how it's benefited us. So I want to say that, and perhaps we need to get better at whatever it is that we're doing, because all year long we've heard about restorative justice, and then I'm concerned that a whole year's passed.
Yeah.
Because I will say this, we got this report on May 7th, 2018, and we got this report on May 31st, 2017. In May 2019, we never got the report. So I said something to Dr. Bridges about it at graduation, so I want to see the discipline data. And so, but now, perhaps that's why we didn't get it, because it's, I was flabbergasted, and I am now, and I know that we're all gonna try to work through and get these numbers, changed, because it's really, it says it doesn't pay to be black in this community. That's what it says, not just for our students either. Thank you.
So,
I'll wait till the end.
okay.
I'm gonna wait till the end too.
Well, I just wanna chime in at this
Yeah.
point, having spent 17 years at Orange High and CW Stanford. If you don't nip the problem at the elementary level,
That's right.
then you have institutionalized suspensions, and the kids you're suspending now in 3rd grade will be suspended in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and they'll come to the high school in 9th grade as suspensions. I witnessed that. So you really have to dig down at the elementary level if you're gonna change this.
Well, I'll go ahead and chime in now, because my question when I started looking at the middle school, that we need to break it down and see, I'll pick on Gravelly Hill. Where did those students, what were their feeder locations? Because it's getting right into what Dr. Hackotis was saying, that we can't figure out how to get into elementary school, we can't get it. So we need to know, there's, in what grade are these in, are the 6th graders or is the 8th graders? And then we need to also know, okay, what's the severity of the suspension? Is it all just controlled substance, or is it physical harm type things? We just need to know what are they being disciplined for. But we've got to pin it down in elementary school. Sorry.
Dr. Bridges? I'm sure that staff and everybody recognizes this data is not what you want.
Yeah.
None of us. I think you mentioned something a few minutes ago about resources. And you look at the numbers in here on a percentage basis, and I'll just use one of the elementary schools, and you said there were 5 kids. But that may have been accounted for 25 suspensions, so there's some replication. You know, as a principal, and I know our principals are here, I can work on that. I mean, if I've got 5 kids identified and I know that they have been referred to the office over a number of times, then I can wrap a support system around them, between home and counselors and teachers, administration, to kind of work with that. Even at the high school level, if you're talking about, I think it's, how many kids is that? Well, if there were 50, if there were 80 kids.
It's about 50 in each of the big high schools.
Yeah. Again, if you're looking at 50 kids who are getting repeatedly suspended from school, you can wrap your arms around those 50 kids and provide some support and help for them as you move through the process. I think they're gonna mention some of these things as they go along. It's important that you don't start the school year and wait until June and say, here the numbers are.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
Right.
principals, they don't do that. They monitor this information, so really you know going along. So as much as this is not what we want to see, I think by the time they get through it, with their presentation, and I've seen all of it, they'll put some things in place that I think will help this a great deal, moving forward.
Hillary?
Do we have these students identified who are still in our district to be wrapping support around next week?
I
mean,
would imagine that, yeah.
I hope, okay.
I mean, we know
I
that.
know what happens. I know who the kids are.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So, as Dr. Bridges says, what happens next? We have been utilizing this database, to problem solve how and what happens next. So our next step included involving student support services, working with outside supports to develop lesson plans to support social emotional health, to develop an administrative discipline committee, and implementation of the new code of conduct, and then whole district professional development and follow-up coaching and support for students and staff. So a part of what we're looking at doing is not just around, Sharita is not doing what she's supposed to do in class, but how are we supporting the teacher so that she knows how to work with the student who may have some behavior challenges, okay?
I just wanted to circle this conversation back for a moment, to what we talked about. You've seen the slides many times. It's just our problem-solving tool, right? It's how we think about when there's a problem, what do we do, and how do we solve that problem? Again, constantly looking at the data, as several of you have already mentioned, that we need to look more frequently, and we need to try to intervene quicker, obviously, than waiting until the end and waiting until we have this much of a disparity that exists. And it is a part of an MTSS structure where we're looking at having those systems in place. We shared about that a good bit last year. We'll continue to share about that this year. We are in the second year of training of MTSS at this point in time. Full implementation for this really happens starting in July of 2020. As we are moving forward, we do have MTSS teams in all of our schools so that our schools can problem solve this data. And then at the district level, we are also trying to problem solve that data as well, just to make sure that we have backup systems, to make sure that we don't, again, wait and let things get out of hand. So we're gonna talk a little bit about from our problem solving end, which we just talked about, and what we know we need to do on behalf of our students to support them.
So before Mr. Graffenreid comes up, what we talked about with our student support team was that we recognize that it's important to determine the root cause of the behavior, and to support students through the discipline process, both the perpetrator and or a victim if there is one involved. And it's important to close feedback loops within the school setting to communicate effectively on behalf of the student, and that includes making sure that we are including the parents in that conversation very early on. So as a result, the new code of conduct asks for student support staff to assess student needs, and then student support representatives have worked over the summer to develop processes and procedures to ensure effective communication.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Kimberly DeGraffenreid. I'm the school counselor at Gravely Hill Middle, and like Ms. Cobb said, myself and about 4 other counselors and social workers, we volunteered over the summer to look at the data that's been presented to you and to answer the question, how can we as student support get in front of these disciplinary referrals and hopefully have a decrease in the number of referrals that you all are seeing. What we created, as you see here, it's a beginning process. We know that there may be some changes over time. But what we created were pre-procedures and post-procedures from a referral. Now, when I speak of referral, I mean a student services referral, not a disciplinary referral. We would like for teachers to submit a referral to us when they see behaviors happening in the classroom. What we did with those procedures were align them with the MTSS tiers and with the various levels of behavior infractions, so that we're going from universal interventions to more intense interventions based on the behavior that we're seeing in schools or in the classrooms. Like I said, this is a beginning process, and towards reducing those behaviors, especially those repeated behaviors that have led to increased suspensions. The main component of these procedures in the tiered process is case management. What we talked about over the summer was when the referrals come in, look at what the teachers are presenting to us, and if it's a behavior surrounding a health need, then maybe the nurse should be the appropriate case manager for that. If it's a behavior surrounding intense mental health need, then either a social worker or a counselor will be the case manager for that, and we would be the ones to do those wraparound services to talk to the teachers about the interventions that they're using in the classroom and collect that data, provide more intense interventions if needed through individual counseling or small group counseling. If we need to refer to mental health services, we will be the ones facilitating and coordinating that, along with meetings with parents, any outside agencies that are involved with the students, and then of course administration, so that everyone is aware of everything that we're trying to do to help and to support that student. So mostly we'll be doing a lot of interviewing the teacher, interviewing the student, observing the students in their classrooms in the different settings, like I said, facilitating those meetings, and just making sure that the communication between everyone that's involved with that student is happening and we're all sitting at the table. And so what we're collecting from these pre and post procedures, if we need to move forward towards the MTSS process to look at more intense interventions or additional testing that may be needed for a student. We have all their data, they're collected. We were very, very passionate about being able to get out in front, because just by sitting here and listening to what you all's concerns are, those are our concerns as well as student support, and we understand that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the front end. So we are aware, we are putting things in place, and we are excited to move forward with this and to be able to help those students on their highest level earlier on. Because when you asked, you know, I think you were speaking about Gravely. Of course, I'm from Gravely, and just looking at those numbers, yes, I know who those students are, and yes, I know what they would need coming through the door on the first day, and I'm ready. I'm ready for them. So this is a procedure that we would like to begin as soon as possible. I think the rollout's for 2020.
I'm sorry, let me ask you a question on that. So if you know that, and you know where these kids are going in the classroom, have you met with those teachers and said, you know, historically, here are some issues, here's some recommendations, you know, here's how, if this escalates or whatever it is? Because I think reactive is not being effective. I think we have to be proactive, and since you said you know, it seems like we should share the wealth of that in some capacity. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No, and that's definitely the plan. I just don't have the rosters at this moment. But yeah, as soon as I know where those particular students are going, I plan on pulling those teachers aside and saying, hey, this is what worked last year, this is what did not work last year. You know, these are some things that you can do in your classroom.
So I just, for lack of better words, I challenge you to just not give the teacher, this is the bad student, right?
No.
I know that's not your intention, but, you know, I think you've got to be very positive in the discussion, because we want the kids to be successful. We don't want the teachers to, you know, necessarily feel like this is gonna be my problem student. You know, this is gonna be the child I'm gonna make the most successful in class.
Correct.
Anyway.
We always speak about students, what they excel at first versus what their challenges are.
Exactly. Thank you. Dr.
Mr. Grafferty, you are a counselor at Gravely Hill.
Yes, sir.
You used the word volunteer. Did you volunteer your time?
I did.
How many hours did you volunteer?
Let's see.
All right, I wanted to make sure she got paid.
They were compensated, but they were asked if they would like to volunteer.
I want to say thank you to you all for having a foresight to get people with passion who are intimately working with these kids to go over there and work on it. This is the kind of work you have to do if you're gonna figure out what's going on here. And it's gonna take a huge effort to do this in every school. Because you're fighting a whole lot of traditional stuff, and once again, you better work the equity person into all of this.
Well, she's very much a part of this company.
Good.
Are there any other questions for me? Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're moving on to Mr. Johnson.
So just before Mr. Johnson comes up, we did, like I said, work with some contracted professionals to develop social emotional lessons for teachers so that they will be able to work with students and help them grow and develop. And so the lessons will be focused on self-awareness and self-management, metacognition, how students are able to think through next steps, and opportunities for students to access resources, as well as strategies for individual health, wellness, and mindfulness. So our goal is not just to say the students are always wrong or in the bad, but also, teacher, what are you doing in that classroom to support that student?
And we have with us tonight Ms. Jamie Bell Williams. She will be discussing our discipline committee, which our discipline committee is made up of principals as well as assistant principals on all levels. And thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As Mr. Johnson said, our administrative discipline team is made up of several school-based administrators, Mr. Marks, Ms. Witherspoon at Cedar Ridge, Ms. Brantley at Orange, Ms. Williamson at at Stanback, and myself, along with our district leadership support folks, Ms. Woodson, Mr. Johnson, Sharita, and Ms. Cobb and Ms. Crimmins. And then recently we added our student support team together to kind of have more in-depth conversations about what our students need. As part of our work, we really focused on creating some commonality behind the tools that we're using to record and report negative behaviors, along with how we are looking at that data so that we can be, again, consistent across all of our schools, along with creating some common language about what those infractions mean and how to respond to them. We gave input into the new code of conduct. We created that tool for measuring that. What we found was that different schools were using different tools, so we said, let's come up with one that works on all levels, that records the information that we need. And we worked with the student support team to start working on the matrix that was shown tonight. The purpose of this work, again, is to create consistency across the district in terms of response to and reporting of discipline incidents, which allows us to better monitor our data and to identify areas for support and improvement. Our goal now is to review the data that has been presented tonight and, again, continue to identify those areas and think about the supports that will be needed to make sure that all of our students can be successful.
All right, so we're moving into the phase where we're really talking about the addendum to the code of conduct. If you'll remember, when, from June, we did a timeline on the code of conduct and talked a little bit about the fact that we would launch the code of conduct in January of 2020. We are at the point where, from recommendation from our equity task force and others, that they would like to have an addendum that really defines the work of the code of conduct, what does it look like, as well as highlighting 3 of our areas that we knew from our own discipline data that was an area of focus. So at this point in time, this is just a screenshot of what the code looks like. You all have a copy of the code in your packet, and we can certainly review pieces of that code as well. We have been in consultation with Mr. Bloomberg's attorney group as well to think about what this addendum says. Basically, it lays things out in 4 specific areas. It talks about the goals of the code as a whole. It talks about the process that has occurred and how we've kind of gotten to this place. It does talk about the major shifts of the revised code of conduct. And then we have some specific infractions, those infractions being around noncompliance, around physical aggression, and around bullying and harassment. And what the focus of those particular items in those infractions is the concept that we're looking at consequences, but also interventions. And the goal is that we would be focused on what those interventions would be to support those students in the midst of potential issues that may arise as a result of those particular incidents, and to create common language so that we don't have confusion from school to school or even classroom to classroom about what it means to be non-compliant, as an example. And then again, we would have implementation of the entire code of conduct, which will be before you, and our plan is for October of this school year, ready for implementation in January of 2020. Yes, ma'am.
I have a number of very specific wording concerns
Okay.
that I thought I would name on here. So the first one is the rule, listen, acknowledge, and respond to directives and requests. Non-compliance, it says non-compliance is not the same as disrespect, disobedience, or insubordination. But then in defining what non-compliance is, it says it's argumentative speech, back talk, persistent demands. I'll just name, a lot of this first one feels kind of vague to me, and the fact that the consequences and interventions are sort of based on the frequency and severity of incidents, any of these things might happen, doesn't suggest that it would bring the level of clarity for like implementation that I would hope that the ultimate code has. Like my hope is that the ultimate code is clearer about what the like based on frequency and severity, to help people get clearer about that. But I don't, this felt hard to understand to me. The like argumentative speech and back talk are non-compliance, but it's not the same as disrespect, disobedience, or I didn't know kind of what we were trying to solve for there. Or
I had it marked too as an area that
It
felt
is
really big.
a hard issue, I would agree. Did you have something?
Well, I think it's really hard to work out, so the board approves the code of conduct. I mean, and that you have a policy on behavior, and then you have an R&P, but still the board has to approve any changes in it. And I just think that working out language at the table this time is not the best way to do it, and so that my suggestion would be whether that it might go to policy to be hashed out. Because the way this reads, it does say, and tell me if I'm wrong, that this would take priority over any conflicting language in the rest of your code. So this is sort of paramount language, and I think it's really important that you all get comfortable with the language and around clarity, because clarity is very important when it comes to equity as well. And then also that you're really comfortable as well with how it meshes with the rest of your code. So that you're comfortable, okay, this is some similar language in the code itself, the original, are we comfortable with how the shift would be? So I do think that those would be important things to consider, and that's one option. I mean, obviously, it's laudable to try to include more interventions and the like, and restorative practices, and I certainly get that. I just want to make sure that the language is clear, that the board has the time to weigh in to make sure you're comfortable with the clarity.
so I don't know when the first policy meeting would be, or when you want to do this, but I have like probably 5 different places where I'm like,
I think that's one of the items
definition.
after our meet this evening, is to make that decision.
And I'm not, if you want to say them now, Sarah, that's fine.
No, I don't think,
I
like,
just-
I don't think we should get into
Yeah.
like, I have a problem with this definition of sexual harassment and like talk it through right now.
Right.
I think we should actually just bring it into a policy meeting where we have more time to actually talk about that, so.
Yes, I agree.
Can I ask one more?
Yes, go ahead.
Is the dress code that we passed earlier this year going to be an addendum on the code of conduct that will go out now? Okay.
The final code of, first of all, for now, and the final code of conduct will have many policies attached to it, tobacco use, dress code, several of those are a part of it, but yes, we will be able to put that, a lot of that will be posted in InfoSnap. A lot of parents go through the registration process in InfoSnap, so we'll have it up for that as well.
Okay, very good. And we'll just add this once it goes through policy.
Any other questions I can answer?
All right.
Thank you.
Are we done with the whole topic? Oh, can we go back to the disciplinary data? I'm sorry, I didn't realize we had fully sort of switched over to that portion. Is that all right? Can we talk about
Yeah,
that?
I have questions too, so please go ahead.
Okay, so, the disciplinary results, they're deeply upsetting. I definitely had a like, all right, I'm on the board now, I've been on the board for a year now and this is on my watch, kind of reaction to them. I have a few requests. I would love for us to dig deeper into this data and understand it better, and I have a few requests about that. One, somebody mentioned, I think, understanding in-school suspension as well. I would like to understand the reasons given for why students got out of school suspension, why they got in school suspension. I'd like to see, how we compare to other districts on that. So I know the reportable incidents piece, it's how we compare, but I wanna know how we compare on that. If it's possible to know how many learning days students missed due to OSS, like, you know, these 3 kids lost 2 weeks of school or whatever, I would like to know that. And I think it would be helpful for us to figure out some ways to like, I don't think we should be looking at this once a year. So I appreciate that it sounds like others in the districts will be reviewing this more than once a year, and I wanna see it more than once a year too. And so I think it would be helpful to come up with some standard ways of reporting the data that are a little bit different than what we looked at today. So I sort of had to do my own math to go see, okay, so if you're a black student in this district, you are 5 times as likely to get an out-of-school suspension as a white student. I had to like do my own math on the side to see that. And so that's the kind of like, sort of like real hard transparency that I'd like to see represented here, where we're like putting the pieces together to like really understand that kind of impact. So I think that those were my main, other than just like, I know everyone cares very much about this. It is surprising to me that we don't have standard ways to like report discipline and these kinds of things. I think these were a lot of smart strategies. And I guess when we do come back to it and get into it deeper, the question on my mind is, okay, so a black student is 5 times as likely as a white student in this district to get out of school suspension right now. How much of that difference do you think, based on your analysis, the discipline committee, how much of that is explained by, you know, this fact, you're talking about like the problem solving aspect of it, so I kinda wanna know that diagnosis, like, if we do these 4 things, we can, you know, reduce those suspensions, like, what do you think is actually causing it, sort of, how much do you think they're contributing, would be helpful to understand. Cause what I didn't see here was, you know, something that I know that exists in some that exists in the world, right? In teachers' perceptions of student behavior, and interpreting behavior differently depending on the race of the student. You know, we're doing some racial equity training, but like, I didn't see in these strategies, like, the racial equity training, I hope that it will help, but sort of, do we think that may be a factor sometimes? Like,
Oh, I
how
think it
much?
absolutely is a factor,
Yeah.
I would agree, and I think that, I mean, the training we did was not with the teachers yet, so
Yeah.
that's coming, that's
Yeah.
part of where we're moving to, but I totally agree. And we know that we're gonna have to do some training around non-compliance, we all talked about what does that really mean, it's a vague statement, that's a part of what we're planning that we will do in October as we're looking at our next PD day, so you're right, there's further, nothing is a one and done, we're gonna have to continue this work over time.
Okay, okay.
Sure. And I don't know the answer to this, the reason why I'm asking the question, you may not either. Does DPI keep in-school suspension data?
They do not.
So would that vary in terms of what qualifies from, okay.
It will vary, and districts look at that differently, and they even, so when I was saying we've had to kind of take this year to create our own internal consistency structure, schools across varying local education agencies have different levels of what happens in their schools. And they even have, I mean, just like we've had that issue here, they have variability from an elementary school to a middle school to a high school, even within those. So it is, the hard part about this kind of data is that it is very inconsistent to compare against. That doesn't mean we don't need to do this work, it just means that we've got, in order to do exactly what you're talking about, we needed some baseline. Something that gave us some information that we're working with so that we have something that we can work from. Because if we don't know where we stand, we can't move forward.
And we don't have ISS in all of our, elementary schools as well, so that's, but moving forward.
You don't have it?
Not in all elementary schools.
Well, how many
So what
do
is
you have it in?
that?
What does that mean?
So we don't have a separate staff member that is assigned to do in-school suspension at an elementary school. They don't have staff. We do have in-school suspension staff assigned at the middle and high school, but that doesn't exist at the elementary level and really in any district I've ever been in. So many times what happens for a student that's at the elementary level, if something is a challenging situation and you're trying to keep them in the classroom, they go to a counselor, they go to a social worker, they sometimes get time out in another teacher's classroom. I mean, there's a variety of strategies that are trying to be employed. But that's not how staff has traditionally been allocated in order for that to happen.
So there are no in-school suspension positions or opportunities at any of the elementary schools, is that correct?
Central, do you have anything? Well, we do have 2 people in the district that, but I don't wanna qualify those individuals as being in school suspension, but we have 2 people that kind of focus on behavior, and that would be one at Eflin Cheeks and one at Central Elementary. Those individuals were brought on board many years ago, and those individuals are there to help support, but their goal is to keep those kids in the classrooms. Am I correct? I don't know if you all wanna say anything different. And they usually go in the classrooms to provide.
They're really intervention specialists is what they are.
Ultimately, yes.
Well, at the lowest out-of-school suspension, so that might be an indicator.
That's a good one.
Yeah, but I will say, if I may, that a lot of that is largely due to the work that the academic coach does with kids. And so I would dare say that looks a certain way, but we also, have alternatives for those students as well.
Additional questions or
So-
items for me to capture?
So I also wanna make sure we're brought back the data on the school bus suspensions as well. And my recommendation to the board is that we review this data monthly.
Yeah, well, and.
Every month, we
Yeah.
see what the data is. There's no reason to wait.
Waiting
Whatever
till
format
May.
it's in,
Yeah, waiting till May is ineffective.
right? So we
Or
cannot,
for a school board member to bring it up.
because if we realize in the first month of school starting that we need resources somewhere, we need to have that discussion to allocate the right resources, and I don't wanna wait. I mean,
Well,
I agree.
we'll go along that line, because it ties in the resources, because I didn't have a clue that we didn't have, in-school suspension services at all the schools. And that keeps the kids in the school, I know. So, monthly might be pushing it, particularly at the first of the month,
Right.
but, we definitely need it more than yearly.
yeah, as chair, I'm gonna put it on the agenda.
Okay.
So the other thing too is I don't want to hide stuff in school suspension. So I don't want us to go from out of school suspension to in school and all of a sudden our data looks better, but we have the same effect
Right.
that these kids are just, anyway. I wanna make sure we see all that data, and I understand that the first time we see the data for the first month or two, it's gonna be raw, that's fine. I think we just need to see it and allow us to help y'all address it somehow, so.
The other one, since we're focused on in-school, we need to also after-school suspension.
After-school suspension.
Yeah.
Similar.
Detention.
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 I don't know if they call it detention, but sometimes they have the child stay after school for
After-school detention, yeah.
Okay, so we need
And
that as
then
well.
lunch detention.
How does the kid get home after they stay after school?
Good question. I know that mine got home.
Let me make sure you understand what's being asked for. So, to the chairman's point, let's say, well, school starts August 26th, so your first point of reporting would be the September 2nd meeting.
Yeah.
Since you have no comparative data from last school year being taken that way,
Mhm.
so that's just the baseline, and what you'll end up doing is just comparing month to month. Is that what you want?
Well, month and total, right? So here's where we are, the total's the same. Next month, hopefully we're not seeing this, but we can see this month, what's the total, and we can see the trending. Because if we just see monthly, we're not gonna be able to correlate it. And to Sarah's point, I just want a little correlation to it, but I realize the first couple of data points may be raw until we get it. but we need to see it. We need to at least understand what's going on.
Yeah, these two clocks are showing different time, and we disband at 10 o'clock, so I'm gonna move that we extend another 20 minutes, is that reasonable?
I second a 20-minute extension.
20 minutes, that's all.
In favor?
That's all.
Aye.
Opposed?
Please get the clock straightened out by the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one thing. As the data gets really granular to the point that it could be identifying of a student, then that would need to be closed session. So, you know,
Yeah, I don't-
You can see it in closed session if it's
Yeah.
to that level.
Right, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
The board absolutely can still see it.
Yes.
It's
Right.
just at some point, it's gonna have to be a closed session topic as opposed to open.
I would just like to make sure that we are able to level it up to share for transparency of what we're doing.
I understand.
We could probably also share like district data if
Exactly.
we can't share school data at the beginning, cause it would.
I just
Right.
I just wanna identify that there is a legal
So
confidentiality
very-
issue there at a point.
So you're okay with it being systemic, not individual school?
No. I wanna see it at school level, and then what I was saying is I'm okay with us leveling it up to a district to share, so it's not identifiable. But let's just get the data first and figure out how we'll distribute it later.
That's fine, just wanted to raise the issue, thank you.
All right, any other comments or questions on this?
Just one thing, it would be helpful to see school by school, what are the available resources currently being utilized to keep kids in school? Because I think most of us, I think, thought there was an in-school suspension program at each school. And, you know, there used to be one at Cameron Park years ago, because Tom Carr was on this board. Kids didn't get suspended, they had to spend all day with him, okay? And he told them stories, he got them online.
Now, there are students that certainly go to a guidance counselor now. in
Well, I
elementary
know,
schools.
but we did approve 2 new positions, if I'm not mistaken, in the budget, they were for 2 additional counselors. One for New Hope and one for Cameron Park. But, you know, somehow or other, this needs to be part of the greater discussion on how we apportion resources.
All right, thank you. Okay,
She's good.
yeah, Diane,
She's up again.
change your hat and.
She's up again.
Yes, this is a interesting topic as well.
Can I ask a question, is there anything here that has to be done tonight?
I
Because
would
we're not
like
gonna
to
get
do-
through
I'm
all
gonna
this
make
in
it
20 minutes.
Yeah.
So
Fingerprint.
Fingerprint, I heard.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I would like to do the committees so we can actually.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking this.
Yeah,
Yeah, they need to do the fingerprint too, she said.
okay.
Needs to be.
We're gonna do the fingerprint.
Do the fingerprint.
Fingerprinting committees.
This is
Okay.
all school board members will be fingerprinted?
Yes.
So could you just, would it be all right then for the board just to approve at this point, moving to the agenda to do the fingerprinting and the committees as the next 2 items on the agenda?
Yes.
Yeah.
So moved.
Second.
I would recommend doing the committees since that should be the fastest one.
You wanna do that first?
Yeah,
Okay,
it
all right.
should be the fastest.
All right, so on the committees, there's an action item and then there's an appointment item, and the action component is that the board each year has to reaffirm your standing committees. So the first item would be whether the board wishes to continue with the budget, achievement, and policy committees, and that would be an action item.
So moved.
Second.
Well,
He
we'll,
can't make the.
Whoa, hold
I
on.
didn't make a motion.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh.
Hold on.
If he
Sorry,
seconds
sorry
it.
guys, let's just step back a second, we just need to
take a deep breath.
take a deep breath, we're going fast, so we first need to modify the agenda to do this.
No, it's on the agenda.
No, I meant the order.
The
The order,
Right.
yeah.
So, do we have a motion to do it? We started with the motion.
Motion to modify the agenda to do the standing committee, the agenda item first, and then do the new fingerprint background check. And that we will postpone the board priorities until the next meeting.
Second.
And the diagnostic reading assessment.
And
second.
diagnostic reading assessment.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right, so moving now with the standing committee that Jonathan had mentioned from our policy committee, policy 2230. We first need to reaffirm the 3 standing committees. Currently, there's only one that's defined in the policy, which is the policy committee.
And I would say for ease of clarity, just to go ahead and reaffirm the policy, if you all want to, the budget and the achievement one, if those are your 3, if that's what the board's pleasure is.
Do we have a motion for that?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
And then it's to the chair to appoint
All
other
right,
committees.
I've talked to all of the members of the board. We'll start with the budget committee, with the chair, Matthew Roberts. Appreciate you chairing that. Ms. Stevens and Dr. Halkiotis. Student achievement, chair, Sarah Smiley, with Hillary McKenzie and Tony McKnight. Policy committee, chair will be myself, with Hillary and Matthew Roberts. All right.
And just as a reminder on board policy, that all board members are welcome to attend all committee meetings.
Exactly. And it
Would you
doesn't.
mind sending that out?
Yes,
as an
yes.
email?
I just didn't want to send it out before we had the.
And all committees should be noticed, publicly noticed.
Yes,
Yes.
so I have reached out to Dr. Bridges to add these committees to the board tab and to actually put some descriptions, who's on it and when the dates are, and that way people can participate from the public.
Sounds good.
And for the superintendent's benefit, our firm generally attends the policy meetings, not achievement or budget, unless there's a legal issue and the chair yourself said we really want some counsel at that meeting, but generally it's just for policy.
All right, now moving to the new fingerprint and background check mandate.
Good evening, this is an action item. I come before you this evening to ask your approval to allow us funding, approximately $6,000 on funding, to implement a new unfunded mandate with regards to additional fingerprint and background check for our pre-K and after-school students. We want to adhere to the requirements, but we don't want to have a burden on our staff members. And so we come before you tonight asking your approval to help us through this requirement, which is due effective September 30th, 2019. The window is very short. We have been working with our pre-K team as well as our after-school folks to identify approximately 125 employees who would be impacted by the new background check requirements. Some of you are probably asking, well, don't we already have a background check process? This is an additional background check process that requires our staff to go through the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services to complete an application and then go to the Sheriff Department for a formal fingerprint. This is beyond what our background check requires. I recommend that we do both. Our background check process is important because we do the nightly watch. The nightly watch, if anybody has any issues, then we get a report on a daily basis in regards to what those issues are. So again, this is the action item this evening. I can go into more detail. I know I wanted to be as brief as possible. You have a tutorial that we are sharing with all our staff members, and we're trying to find ways where we could work with the Sheriff Department, perhaps to have a one-stop shop where all the impacted folks could come in and get this done. We have done reimbursements before with, we reimburse people who are going through their license renewal with the $35 there. So this would be a process pretty similar to that, where we will work with those staff members. The cost will be $46.50. They'll have to pay for that amount up front. There is no way that we can pay for it for them. And then we have a process that we'd like to put in place to reimburse our staff members for that amount.
Move to approve reimbursing staff
Second.
members.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I think
Motion
it's
carries.
amazing that we can't do criminal background checks for weapons purchases, but we gotta make sure the pre-K kids are protected. Now, I think that's important, but I think it speaks volumes on what they don't wanna do compared to what they feel they can do easily.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. We'll go back to our regular scheduled agenda. So next item is the diagnostic reading assessment.
And we already
I thought
told
we
that.
for the next
We
time.
extended it to we changed the order, we didn't say.
I
we
think
can
you
do
did
it.
say, we
did
said
say.
we're doing two
Oh.
items,
Yes, we
take
did
it,
say
that's
it.
it. And I
We
think
said
I hear unanimity.
Yeah, that's
Move
fine.
to
Move to
adjourn.
adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved.
That's democracy.
Keep you out of the ball.
That's what you call democracy.
I think you forgot on that one, Will. Yeah, we postponed it, man.
It's done. So moved.
Oh, man.
Randy, did you see the email that I just sent you? Randy Bridges. Okay, I got it from Ed Dunlap today, it was about sending something to all principals, and I don't do that.
Oh, it's about,
So, okay, did you, I said, did you get that?
I got this morning about the football game, yeah.
Is that, I got 3 messages.
yeah, I
I'm
just,
about to send it to all our principals.
they asked me to say, I was like, no, I said no, so no.
I'm trying to be nice.
Okay, well, I'll send, okay, it's this. Is that it?